The sprawling metropolis of Centrium shone like a beacon amidst the vast expanse of space. Its towering spires and gleaming metal facades seemed to defy the void surrounding it, a testament to the ingenuity and ambition of the Orion civilization. It was here, in this bustling hub of activity, that Lieutenant Arra story began. Born to a family with a long lineage of military service, Arra's path had been set from an early age. The Orion society placed great value on strength, discipline, and unwavering loyalty to the Douglas clan, qualities that were instilled in her from the moment she could comprehend them. Even as a child, Arra exhibited an uncanny aptitude for strategy and combat that set her apart from her peers. Her natural talents, combined with a relentless drive to excel, propelled her through the ranks of the Orion military training programs at an astonishing pace. Arra's days were filled with grueling physical conditioning, tactical simulations, and the study of ancient combat philosophies. She devoured every lesson, every technique, with an insatiable hunger for knowledge and self-improvement. Her instructors marveled at her prowess, her ability to anticipate and counter even the most complex maneuvers, and her unwavering determination in the face of adversity. As she progressed through the ranks, Arra's reputation preceded her. Tales of her exploits and training exercises spread like wildfire, earning her both respect and envy from her fellow soldiers. Yet she remained focused, her sights set on a singular goal: to become one of the Orion military's elite, a guardian of the Douglas clan, and a protector of the civilization she loved. Her first taste of real combat came sooner than expected, when she was assigned to a covert operation on a distant planet. It was there, amidst the chaos of battle, that Arra's true potential was unleashed. With a keen strategic mind and a fearless demeanor, she led her unit through a series of daring maneuvers, emerging victorious against overwhelming odds. From that day forward, Arra's rise within the Orion ranks was meteoric. She became a symbol of the civilization's martial prowess, her loyalty to the Douglas clan, and her comrades in arms unwavering. With each mission, she honed her skills, tempered by the harsh realities of war and the sacrifices it demanded. As Centrium's gleaming spires cast their radiant glow across the cosmos, Arra stood ready, a warrior forged in the fires of conflict, her story just beginning to unfold. The trials and tribulations that lay ahead would test her resolve, her courage, and her very sense of self, but she was prepared to face them head-on, for the honor of the Orion civilization and the bond she had forged with her brothers and sisters in arms. Amidst the vast expanse of space, Centrium stood as a shining jewel, a crown adorning the Orion civilization's many achievements. From afar, the station appeared as a brilliant constellation of its own, its gleaming spires and interconnected cities defying the void around them with an ethereal grace. As Arra stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the station's pristine docking bay, she was struck, as always, by the grandeur of her home. Towering archways of polished metal framed breathtaking vistas of Centrium's floating gardens and residential districts, where lush greenery intertwined with elegant architectural forms. Gravity generators maintained a gentle, Earth-like pull, allowing the station's denizens to wander among these suspended paradises, as if strolling through a park on solid ground. Despite the wonders that surrounded her, Arra couldn't help but feel a tinge of unease. The serenity of Centrium was a stark contrast to the chaos and violence she had witnessed on the battlefield. She had spent so much of her life in the trenches, immersed in the gritty realities of war, that these moments of tranquility were almost unsettling. As she made her way through the bustling thoroughfares, Arra couldn't help but notice the gazes of admiration and respect that followed her. Her exploits had become the stuff of legend among the Orion people, and her return from each mission was celebrated as a triumph of their civilization's martial prowess. Yet behind the accolades and the adulation, Arra yearned for something more personal, more grounded. She found solace in the company of her family and closest friends, those who knew her not just as a legendary soldier, but as a person with hopes, fears, and a life beyond the confines of military service. In the cozy apartment she shared with her sister, Arra would shed the weight of her uniform and her rank, allowing herself to be simply Arra, a young woman with a wry sense of humor and a love for the simple pleasures of home. She delighted in her sister's culinary creations, savoring the flavors of dishes she had only tasted in ration packs during her deployments. It was in these moments of respite that Arra found herself reflecting on the duality of her existence. The Orion civilization prided itself on being a bastion of peace and prosperity, a utopia amidst the chaos of the galaxy. Yet it was her role, and that of her comrades, to venture forth into that chaos, to confront the threats that lurked beyond Centrium's gleaming walls. As she gazed out from the balcony of her apartment, taking in the breathtaking vista of Centrium's floating gardens and the vast expanse of stars beyond, Arra couldn't help but wonder how long this delicate balance could be maintained. For now, she would cherish these fleeting moments of serenity, knowing that duty would soon call her back to the front lines, where the true test of her mettle awaited. The morning had begun like any other on Centrium, with Arra savoring the luxury of a leisurely breakfast with her sister before making her way to the military command center. The tranquil atmosphere, however, was abruptly shattered by the blaring of emergency klaxons echoing through the corridors. Arra's soldier instincts kicked in instantly, propelling her into a brisk jog as she followed the sound of the alarms. The scene that greeted her in the command center was one of controlled chaos, with officers and analysts scurrying about, barking orders and poring over a constant stream of incoming data. "Lieutenant Veeden, we've got a situation," barked her commanding officer, General Kragan, as she approached. "Agranus Septim has become the latest battleground in the Outer Rim conflicts." Arra felt her heart sink at the mention of that ill-fated planet. Agranus Septim was a world rich in rare mineral deposits, but it had been ravaged by decades of civil war and territorial disputes between various factions vying for control of its resources. What little remained of its once thriving cities was now reduced to rubble, the planet's surface a pockmarked testament to the senseless violence that had consumed it. "What are our orders?" Sir Arra asked, her voice steeled with professionalism, though deep down, a knot of dread was forming in the pit of her stomach. General Kragan's expression was grim as he laid out the situation. Agranus Septim has become a powder keg, with the Malaxians, the Kydron Horde, and a dozen other groups all vying for control. We've been contracted by the Terran Coalition to establish a foothold and secure the mining operations they have a stake in. As the general droned on about troop deployments and strategic objectives, Arra's mind raced. Agranus Septim wasn't just another battlefield to her. It was the last known location of 3 of her closest friends' former squad mates, who had left the Orion military to pursue careers as freelance mercenaries. "Well, sir, permission to speak freely," Arra interjected, her voice cutting through the din of the command center. General Kragan eyed her warily, but nodded his assent. "My friends, Jack, Nara, and Tiev, they were working a contract on Agranus Septim when all communication was lost," Arra explained, her voice strained with worry. "If we're deploying to that planet, I need to be part of the mission. I have to find out what happened to them." The general's expression softened, and he placed a reassuring hand on Arra's shoulder. "I understand your personal stake in this, Lieutenant. Your friend's status is currently unknown, but finding them, or at the very least uncovering their fate, will be a priority." Relief washed over Arra, tempered by the grim realization of what her mission to Agranus Septim might entail. As she turned to gather her gear, her gaze fell upon the vast viewport, where the planet's distant image could be seen a mere speck amidst the countless stars, but one that held the answers to her friend's disappearance. The journey ahead would be fraught with peril, but Arra was resolute. She would brave the chaos of Agranus Septim, not just as a soldier of the Orion civilization, but as a friend determined to bring her comrades home, no matter the cost. As the briefing on the Agranus Septim situation continued, Arra found it increasingly difficult to maintain her composure. The details were grim. Her friends, Jack, Nara, and TV, had been working as hired guns for a mining corporation when they had gone off the grid. Their last known coordinates placed them in the midst of a raging battle between the Malaxian forces and the Kydron Horde, 2 of the most vicious and uncompromising factions, vying for control of Agranus Septim. "Are we considering a rescue operation?" Arra blurted out, her voice edged with urgency. General Kragan's expression was one of regret as he shook his head solemnly. "I'm afraid not, Lieutenant. Their status as independent contractors puts them outside the purview of our mission parameters. Our orders are clear: secure the mining operations and establish a foothold. A search and rescue would be a costly diversion that command is unwilling to authorize. Arra felt her blood boil at the clinical detachment of the general's words. To the strategists and bureaucrats orchestrating this operation, her friends were little more than acceptable collateral damage, their lives deemed expendable in the grand calculus of war. As the briefing concluded and the officers began to disperse, Arra found herself rooted in place, a maelstrom of emotions raging within her. She thought of Jack, the grizzled veteran whose mentorship had guided her through her earliest battles, of Nara, the tech genius whose biting wit and unflappable demeanor had become a source of comfort in even the duress of circumstances, and TV, the young hotshot sniper whose skills were matched only by his loyalty and devotion to those he considered family. They had been through hell together, forging bonds that transcended the rigid hierarchy of the military. To abandon them now, to leave them at the mercy of the unforgiving forces that ravaged Agrana's septum, was unthinkable. As Arra made her way back to her quarters, her steps heavy with determination, she knew what she had to do. The Orion High Command might be content to sacrifice her friends for the sake of their objectives, but she would not stand idly by. Shedding her uniform, she began assembling her gear, weapons, armor, and every piece of specialized equipment she could requisition. This would be an unsanctioned mission, one that could potentially brand her as a deserter or a rogue element, but such concerns paled in comparison to the debt she owed her friends. They were more than just comrades in arms, they were family, bound by shared experiences and sacrifices that civilians could never comprehend. In Arra would move heaven and earth to bring them home, even if it meant defying orders and venturing into the heart of the chaos that consumed Agrana's septum. As she secured the last of her gear, Arra's gaze fell upon the holographic image of her friends, frozen in time, their faces alight with the carefree grins of soldiers on leave. A steely resolve settled over her features, and she made a silent vow she would not rest until they were safe, until their family was whole once more. The path ahead would be treacherous, but Arra had been forged in the fires of countless battles. She was a warrior of the Orion civilization, and no force in the galaxy could deter her from this mission, a personal crusade fueled by the bonds of friendship and the unyielding refusal to leave anyone behind. Arra's declaration of her intent to mount an unsanctioned rescue mission was met with a wave of concern and skepticism from her superiors. As she stood before General Kragan and his staff, she could see the disapproval etched on their faces, a mix of disbelief and disappointment at her apparent disregard for protocol. "Lieutenant Vaidan, I understand your personal attachment to your missing comrades," the general began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "But you must recognize the larger stakes at play here. Agrana's septum is a powder keg, and our mission is to secure the mining operations, not engage in a costly rescue operation that could jeopardize everything." Arra steeled herself, her jaw set in determination. "With all due respect, sir, I cannot abandon my friends to the chaos on that planet. They are more than just fellow soldiers, they are family. And in the Orion military, we have an unspoken code: no one gets left behind." A murmur rippled through the room, and Arra could see some of the officers nodding in agreement. For all the bureaucracy and political maneuvering that governed their operations, the bond between soldiers on the battlefield was a sacred thing, transcending ranks and protocols. "You would be disobeying direct orders," Lieutenant Kragan warned, his brow furrowed. "Such an action could be construed as desertion, punishable by court-martial." "Then I'm prepared to face those consequences," Arra replied, her voice unwavering. "But I will not stand idly by while good soldiers, my friends, are left to die on that forsaken planet." An uneasy silence fell over the room, the weight of Arra's words hanging in the air. She could see the conflict playing out on the faces of her fellow officers, torn between duty and the bonds of camaraderie that bound them all. It was then that a voice spoke up from the back of the room, one that Arra recognized instantly: Major Corin, a grizzled veteran who had served alongside her father. "The lieutenant is right," Corin growled, stepping forward. "We don't leave our own behind, no matter the orders. If she's determined to go after her friends, she'll need support, and I'm offering mine." A ripple of agreement spread through the ranks, and one by one, other officers stepped forward, voicing their willingness to join Arra's mission. She felt a swell of gratitude and pride, realizing that her comrades understood the depth of her conviction and the unbreakable bonds that drove her. General Kragan's expression remained inscrutable as he surveyed the scene before him. Finally, he raised his hand, calling for silence. "Very well, Lieutenant," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "While I cannot officially sanction this operation, I will not stand in your way. But know this, you and those who choose to accompany you will be operating without the protection or resources of the Orion military. The consequences of your actions will be yours alone to bear." Arra nodded, her expression resolute. "Understood, sir, and thank you." As she turned to leave, gathering those who had volunteered to join her mission, Arra felt a sense of purpose burning within her. This would be no ordinary operation, bound by the rigid constraints of protocol and strategy. This was a quest born of loyalty, friendship, and an unshakable belief in the bonds that held the Orion military together. Though the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty and peril, Arra knew that she would not walk it alone. Her comrades, bound by that same unspoken code, would stand by her side, risking everything to bring their brothers and sisters home. For in the chaos of war, it was those bonds forged in the crucible of battle and tempered by shared sacrifice that mattered most, and Arra would stop at nothing to honor them. With the support of her fellow officers solidified, Arra wasted no time in assembling the team that would accompany her on the unsanctioned rescue mission to Agranis Septim. She knew that the challenges they would face required a diverse array of skills and specialties, each member bringing a unique set of capabilities to the table. First, she sought out Zara Kyrell, a tech genius whose prowess with hacking and electronic warfare was unmatched. Zara's diminutive stature and unassuming demeanor belied a brilliant mind and a wicked sense of humor, both of which had served her well in the field. When Arra explained the mission, Zara didn't hesitate, her eyes gleaming with excitement at the prospect of taking on the formidable security systems that guarded Agranis Septim. Next was Rafe Dorn, a former reconnaissance specialist whose skills in stealth and infiltration were legendary. Rafe had been born on one of the Outer Rim mining colonies, and his intimate knowledge of their layouts and security protocols would prove invaluable. Despite his gruff exterior, he harbored a deep respect for Arra and her comrades, and the thought of leaving them behind was abhorrent to him. The team's firepower came in the form of Jax Croven, a hulking mountain of a man whose prowess with heavy weapons was matched only by his unwavering loyalty. Jax had served alongside Arra's father during the Rallian campaigns, and he saw this mission as an opportunity to honor that legacy. His booming laughter and irreverent sense of humor belied a keen strategic mind and a steadfast commitment to the mission. For medical expertise, Arra turned to Dr. Ayla Veras, a trauma surgeon whose skills had been honed on the front lines of countless war zones. Ayla's calm demeanor and unwavering professionalism were balm in even the most chaotic of situations, and her ability to keep cool under pressure would be invaluable on Agranis Septim. Rounding out the team was Kel Darren, a former sniper whose keen eyes and steady hands had saved Arra's life on more than one occasion. Kel was a man of few words, but his loyalty was unquestionable, and he would follow Arra into the depths of hell itself if she asked. As the team assembled in the hangar bay, each member bringing their specialized gear and equipment, Arra couldn't help but feel a swell of pride and gratitude. These were the soldiers she had trusted with her lifetime and again, and now they were risking everything to join her on this unsanctioned mission. All know the risks, she addressed them, her voice carrying the weight of command. This won't be like any operation we've undertaken before. We'll be operating without support, without backup, and in the heart of one of the most volatile war zones in the galaxy. She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. But we're doing this for our own, for Jack, Nara, and TV. They're family, and we don't leave family behind. A chorus of nods and murmurs of assent met her declaration, each member of the team understanding the depth of the bonds that drove them. "Then let's get to work," Arra said, a determined smile playing across her lips. "We've got some friends to bring home." As they boarded the sleek transport that would carry them to Agranis Septim, Arra knew that the challenges ahead would be daunting. But with this team at her side, a collection of the most skilled and loyal soldiers she had ever known, she felt a sense of confidence and resolve that steeled her for the trials to come. They were more than just a unit, they were a family forged in the fires of battle. And on Agranus Septim, they would face those fires once more, united in their quest to bring their brothers and sisters home. As the team made their final preparations for the journey to Agranus Septim, Arra knew there was one more crucial element she needed to secure: the expertise and battlefield experience of Marcus Draven, an aging but legendary figure within the Orion military ranks. Marcus had earned a reputation as a brilliant strategist and an uncompromising warrior, his exploits the stuff of legend passed down through the generations. But he was equally renowned for his cantankerous demeanor and his disdain for the pomp and circumstance that often accompanied military life. When Arra found him in the officers' lounge, nursing a glass of Orion brandy, the grizzled veteran fixed her with a steely glare that would have sent lesser soldiers running. "Vidan," he growled, his voice a rumbling baritone. "Word is you're putting together a suicide squad to go charging into that hellhole on Agranus Septim." Arra met his gaze unflinchingly, knowing that despite his gruff exterior, there was a bond between them that transcended rank or protocol. "You know me too well, Marcus," she replied, taking a seat across from him. "I can't just leave my friends behind, not after everything we've been through." Marcus snorted derisively, taking a long swig of his brandy. "And I suppose you're here to ask for my help on this little unsanctioned adventure of yours." Arra nodded, her expression earnest. "You know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Your experience and strategic mind could mean the difference between success and failure, between bringing our people home or leaving them to die on that forsaken rock." For a moment Marcus was silent, his gaze distant as if weighing the gravity of her words. Then, with a heavy sigh, he drained his glass and rose to his feet. "All right, Vadan," he grumbled. "I'll join your little crusade. But not for the glory or the accolades. I owe your father a life debt, and this is how I'll repay it." Relief washed over Arra, tempered by the knowledge that persuading Marcus to join had been a battle in itself. She knew the scars that haunted the grizzled veteran, the ghosts of past battles that had left him jaded and weary of the pageantry of war. As they made their way to the hangar, Marcus fell into step beside her, his presence a reassuring constant in the chaos that was about to unfold. "You know, Vidan," he rumbled, his voice tinged with something akin to affection. "Your old man would be proud of you, charging headlong into this mess like a true soldier of Orion. Just don't go getting yourself killed, or I'll have to hear his nagging from beyond the grave." Arra couldn't help but chuckle at the gruff sentiment, knowing that beneath Marcus's crusty exterior lay a heart that still beat with the same loyalty and camaraderie that had forged their bond. As they boarded the transport, Arra caught Marcus's eye, offering him a nod of gratitude. With him by her side, their chances of success had increased tenfold, but more importantly, she knew that she wouldn't be facing the trials ahead alone. For in the chaos of war, it was the bonds forged in battle that mattered most. And with Marcus watching her back, Arra felt a renewed sense of determination to bring her friends home, no matter the cost. With the team assembled and their resolve steeled, the focus shifted to the critical preparations for their unsanctioned mission to Agranus Septim. Arra knew that every advantage, every edge they could muster, would be vital in the harsh and unforgiving environment that awaited them. In the armory, they outfitted themselves with the latest in Orion military technology. Zara, the team's tech specialist, oversaw the distribution of advanced armor plating, each suit a marvel of engineering that could withstand even the most punishing of firefights. The sleek, form-fitting material was deceptively lightweight, yet capable of deflecting everything from projectiles to plasma burns. For weaponry, they spared no expense. Jax, the towering heavy weapons expert, cradled a massive particle cannon, its intricate mechanisms humming with barely restrained power. Kell, the sniper, meticulously checked and rechecked the sighting systems on his high-precision rifle, ensuring that every shot would find its mark with surgical precision. Rafe, the infiltration specialist, pored over blueprints and schematics, committing every detail of the mining facilities on Agranus Septim to memory. His keen eye for structural weaknesses and security blind spots would be invaluable in their efforts to slip past enemy lines undetected. In the medical bay, Dr. Alaveris oversaw the preparation of a fully stocked trauma kit, ensuring that they had every piece of equipment and medication necessary to treat even the most grievous of injuries in the field. As the preparations continued, Marcus, The grizzled veteran took Arra aside, his expression grave. "You know as well as I do that this mission is a long shot, Vidan," he rumbled. "Agranus septum is a powder keg, and we're about to jump right into the middle of it." Arra met his gaze unflinchingly, her jaw set with determination. "I know the risks, Marcus, but I also know that we can't leave our people behind, not after everything we've been through together." The veteran nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "Then we'll do this the Orion way, hit hard, hit fast, and leave nothing standing in our wake." As the team made their final checks, a hush fell over the hangar bay. They knew that once they embarked, there would be no turning back, no safety net to catch them if they faltered. This mission was a leap into the unknown, a defiance of orders and protocols, all for the sake of the bonds that bound them together. Arra stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the assembled team, her family, forged in the fires of countless battles. "We all know what's at stake," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command. "But we also know why we're doing this for our friends, our brothers and sisters who have been left behind on that forsaken rock." She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. "There will be no backup, no reinforcements. We're on our own out there. But that's how we've always operated, relying on each other, trusting in the bonds that have carried us through hell and back." A chorus of nods and murmurs of assent met her words, each member of the team steeling themselves for the challenges ahead. "Then let's get to work," Arra said, a determined smile playing across her lips. "We've got some friends to bring home." As the sleek transport craft roared to life, its engines propelling them into the vastness of space, Arra felt a sense of purpose burn within her. They were venturing into the unknown, into a war zone that had claimed the lives of countless others. But they were Orion soldiers, forged in the fires of battle and bound by an unbreakable code. And on Agranus septum they would face those fires once more, united in their quest to bring their lost brothers and sisters home. The cavernous hangar bay of Centrium echoed with the low thrum of powerful engines as Arra's team conducted the final pre-flight checks on their spacecraft, the Dawnbreaker, a sleek and heavily armed vessel that would serve as their chariot into the heart of the conflict on Agranus septum. As Arra ran her hands along the Dawnbreaker's smooth hull, she couldn't help but marvel at the technological marvels that the Orion civilization had produced. This ship, with its advanced shielding and formidable weapon systems, was a testament to their prowess in the arts of war. Yet even as she took pride in the power coursing through the Dawnbreaker's systems, Arra felt a weight settle upon her shoulders. This was no ordinary mission, bound by protocols and chain of command. This was a quest born of loyalty, friendship, and an unwavering refusal to leave anyone behind. Around her, the team moved with practiced efficiency, each member attending to their final preparations. Zara's nimble fingers danced across the control panels, ensuring that the ship's systems were primed for the journey ahead. Jax and Kel methodically checked and rechecked their weapons, their expressions grim with determination. Even Marcus, the grizzled veteran, seemed to move with a renewed sense of purpose, his years of experience steeling him for the trials to come. As the final checks were completed, Arra stepped onto the Dawnbreaker's boarding ramp, pausing for a moment to drink in the sight of Centrium's gleaming spires and floating gardens. This was her home, the crown jewel of the Orion civilization, a bastion of peace and prosperity amidst the chaos of the galaxy. But now she was venturing forth into that chaos, willingly stepping into the crucible of war for the sake of those she held dear. Lieutenant. Arra turned to find Marcus standing beside her, his rugged features etched with concern. "You know there's no going back after this," he rumbled, his voice a low baritone. "Once we leave Centrium, we'll be on our own, operating without the protection of the Orion military." Arra met his gaze, her own eyes burning with resolve. "I know, Marcus. But we have to do this for Jack, Nara, and TV. They're family, and we don't leave family behind." The veteran's expression softened, and he gave a solemn nod. "Then let's get this show on the road, Vidan. The sooner we get to Agranus septum, the sooner we can bring our people home." With those words, Arra turned and strode up the boarding ramp, the rest of the team falling into step behind her. As the Dawnbreaker's hatches sealed shut and the engines roared to life, she felt a sense of finality settle over her. This was at the point of no return. As the ship disengaged from Centrium's docking bays and slipped into the inky void of space, Arra couldn't help but steal one last glance at the fading visage of her home. Its towering spires and gleaming facades seemed to recede into the distance, a fleeting mirage of beauty and serenity that she was leaving behind. Ahead lay Agrana Septim, a world ravaged by war, a crucible of chaos and violence that had claimed so many lives. And yet it was there that her friends had been lost, their fates uncertain amidst the madness. Arra steeled herself, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of stars that stretched before them. She knew the risks, the sacrifices that might be required, but she was prepared to face them head-on. For in the Orion military there was an unspoken code, a creed that bound them all together, forged in the fires of countless battles. No one gets left behind. And on Agrana Septim, Arra intended to honor that code. This was the way that all in the Orion military were to act. The Dawnbreaker sliced through the inky void of space, its engines humming with restrained power as it hurtled towards the coordinates marking the outer edges of the Agrana Septim system. The journey had been relatively uneventful thus far, but Arra knew better than to let her guard down. The galaxy was a treacherous place, rife with dangers lurking in the shadows between stars. "Lieutenant, we're approaching the Heathian drift," Zara's voice crackled over the comm system. Long-range scans are picking up a patrol craft, running silent but heavily armed. Arra felt the hairs on the back of her neck prickle with apprehension. The Heathian drift was a lawless expanse of space, a no-man's land where allegiances shifted like the tides, and even the most innocuous of ships could find themselves in the crosshairs of hostile forces. "Take us to silent running," she ordered, her voice calm but laced with a steely edge. "Mask our signatures and prepare for evasive maneuvers." Around her, the team sprang into action, their movements precise and practiced. Zara's fingers danced across the control panels, cloaking the Dawnbreaker's energy signatures and rendering them virtually invisible to all but the most sophisticated of scanners. Jax and Kel checked their weapons one last time, their expressions grim with determination. For long, tense moments, the Dawnbreaker slipped through the void, its cloaking systems humming with barely restrained energy. Then, without warning, a proximity alarm blared, shattering the silence. "They've got a lock on us," Zara shouted, her voice strained. "Incoming fire." The Dawnbreaker shuddered as the first salvo of energy blasts impacted against its shields, the ship's inertial dampener struggling to compensate for the violent evasive maneuvers Arra had initiated. Through the viewports, Arra caught a glimpse of their attackers, a sleek, heavily armed patrol craft bearing the unmistakable markings of the Herbert Syndicate, one of the most ruthless and opportunistic mercenary groups operating in the Outer Rim. "Zara, get me a channel," she barked, gripping the arms of her seat as the Dawnbreaker banked hard to starboard, narrowly avoiding another barrage of fire. "Channel open, Lieutenant." "Herbert Patrol, this is Lieutenant Arra Vidan of the Orion military," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of command. "We are on a sanctioned mission and mean you no harm. Break off your attack and allow us safe passage." For a moment, the only response was the stuttering roar of the Dawnbreaker's engines and the occasional impact of enemy fire against their shields. Then, a gruff voice crackled over the comm. "Orion military, my ass," the Herbog captain snarled. "We've been tracking your little cloaked ship for cycles now. You're either smugglers or hired guns, and we don't take kindly to either in our territory." Arra cursed under her breath, realizing that their unsanctioned status had left them vulnerable to such misunderstandings. She knew that attempting to explain the truth of their mission would only invite further scrutiny and potentially fatal consequences. "Marcus, get on the gun," she ordered, her voice low but laced with urgency. "We're going to have to fight our way out of this." The grizzled veteran didn't need to be told twice. With a grim nod, he lumbered towards the Dawnbreaker's weapon systems, his movements betraying a lifetime of experience in the heat of battle. As the first volley of the Dawnbreaker's return fire lanced out, slamming into the Herbog patrol craft's shields, Arra felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. This was no mere simulation or training exercise. This was the harsh reality of the galaxy's unforgiving expanse, where alliances shifted like the sands, and the only constants were the bonds forged between comrades in arms. "Keep it tight," people, she shouted over the cacophony of weapons fire and the Dawnbreaker's groaning hull. "We're not dying out here, not when we're so close." The battle raged on, a deadly dance of evasive maneuvers and precision strikes as the two ships wove through the void, trading volleys of searing energy and ballistic projectiles. Through it all, Arra maintained her composure, barking orders and adjusting their tactics on the fly, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and contingencies. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the Herbert patrol craft's shields flickered and died, its hull buckling under the relentless barrage from the Dawnbreaker's weapons. "They're crippled," Lieutenant Marcus growled, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "Should we finish them off?" Arra shook her head, her expression resolute. "No, we've made our point. Let's just get the hell out of here before they call for reinforcements." As the Dawnbreaker banked hard, streaking away from the disabled Herbert ship, Arra allowed herself a moment of respite, her heart still pounding in her chest. The encounter had been a harsh reminder of the perils that awaited them in the lawless reaches of space, where even the smallest of skirmishes could spell disaster. But they had prevailed, their bonds of loyalty and trust forged anew in the crucible of battle, and as Agranus Septim loomed ever closer on the Dawnbreaker's navigational charts, Arra knew that they would need that unity more than ever. For the true test of their resolve still lay ahead, amidst the chaos and carnage that had claimed so many lives on that war-torn world. As the Dawnbreaker hurtled through the inky void, the distant image of Agranus Septim growing larger and more foreboding with every passing hour, Arra knew it was time to convene her team and lay out their strategy. The stakes were high, and their mission would require a level of precision and forethought that would test even the most seasoned of soldiers. Gathered around the holographic projector table in the Dawnbreaker's war room, the team studied the three-dimensional rendering of their target, a sprawling mining facility nestled deep within the rugged, storm-lashed mountains of Agranus Septim's northern continent. The installation was a veritable fortress, bristling with anti-aircraft batteries and heavily fortified bunkers, a testament to the value of the rare minerals that lay beneath the planet's surface. "Our objective is twofold," Arra began, her voice carrying the weight of command as she gestured towards the holographic display. "First and foremost, we need to locate and extract Jack, Nara, and Tiev from wherever they're being held within this facility." A series of nods rippled through the assembled team, their expressions grim with determination. "Secondly," Arra continued, "we need to gather any intelligence we can on the various factions vying for control of the mining operations. If we're going to have any hope of getting our people out safely, we need to know who we're up against and what their motivations are." Marcus, the grizzled veteran, let out a low rumble of assent. "The situation on Agranus Septim is a powder keg, Lieutenant. The Malaxians, the Kedron Horde, the Free Miners Collective, they're all mixed up in this mess, and none of them are going to take kindly to us sticking our noses where they don't belong. Which is why we're going to have to operate with the utmost stealth and precision," Arra replied, her gaze sweeping over the assembled team. "This is hostile territory, and we can't afford to be spotted or engaged until we've achieved our objectives." Rafe, the infiltration specialist, leaned forward, his sharp eyes studying the holographic renderings of the facility's layout. "It won't be easy, Lieutenant. The terrain around the facility is treacherous, with frequent ion storms and jagged rock formations that'll play havoc with our sensors and navigation systems." Arra nodded, her expression grim. "I know, Rafe, but we've faced worse odds before, and we'll adapt our tactics accordingly. Zara, I want you to work on developing countermeasures for those ion storms. We can't afford to be flying blind when we make our approach." The tech specialist gave a curt nod, her fingers already dancing across her datapad as she began running simulations and calculations. For hours, the strategy session continued, with each member of the team contributing their expertise and insights. Contingencies were planned, escape routes mapped, and a myriad of scenarios war-gamed until every possible outcome had been accounted for. Finally, as the holographic display flickered and dimmed, Arra stepped back, her gaze sweeping over her assembled comrades. "We all know the risks," she said, her voice low but laced with conviction. "This is going to be one of the most challenging missions any of us have ever undertaken. But we're doing this for our own, for Jack, Nara, and Tiev. A chorus of nods and murmurs of assent met her words, each member of the team steeling themselves for the trials that lay ahead. Then let's get to work, Arra said, a determined smile playing across her lips. We've got some friends to bring home. As the team dispersed to attend to their final preparations, Arra felt a sense of purpose burning within her. The road ahead would be fraught with peril, but she had faith in her comrades, in their unwavering loyalty and the bonds that had been forged in the crucible of countless battles. On Agranus Septim, they would face their greatest test yet, but Arra knew that they were ready. They were Orion soldiers, warriors of the highest caliber, and they would not falter in their quest. The Dawnbreaker emerged from the swirling vortex of hyperspace with a violent lurch, the inertial dampeners straining to compensate for the sudden deceleration. Through the viewports, a sight both breathtaking and harrowing unfolded before Arra's eyes, the war-torn visage of Agranus Septim. The planet hung suspended in the inky void like a bruised and battered sentinel, its surface pockmarked by the scars of decades of unrelenting conflict. Vast swaths of its continents had been reduced to cratered wastelands, the remnants of once mighty fortresses and cities crumbling into ruin amidst the barren landscape. Yet even in the midst of such devastation, Agranus Septim possessed a haunting beauty. Swirling storms of vivid azure and crimson hues raged across its atmosphere, their turbulent majesty a stark contrast to the desolation that marred the planet's surface. We're coming up on the outer defense perimeter, Zara's voice crackled over the comm, laced with tension. Sensors are picking up an array of orbital gun batteries and early warning systems. Arra felt her heart begin to pound, the reality of their mission crystallizing with each passing moment. They were venturing into the heart of a war zone, a place where countless lives had been lost, and where the line between ally and enemy was ever shifting. "Take us in low and engage the cloaking system," she ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We can't afford to be spotted until we're past those defenses." The Dawnbreaker banked hard, its sleek hull seeming to almost skim the upper reaches of Agranus Septim's turbulent atmosphere as it began its descent. Around them, the planet's orbital defenses bristled with menace, their sensor arrays and weapon emplacements, scanning the void for any sign of hostile intrusion. But the Dawnbreaker's cutting-edge cloaking systems rendered them virtually invisible, their energy signatures masked and their hull distorted by advanced holographic projectors. As they slipped past the outer defenses, Arra couldn't help but marvel at the technological marvels that had been wrought by the Orion civilization, even in the midst of such chaos and destruction. Their ingenuity shone through. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the Dawnbreaker breached the upper atmosphere, its hull trembling as it encountered the first eddies of Agranus Septim's turbulent weather patterns. "Hang on tight," People Marcus growled over the comm, his gruff voice a reassuring constant amidst the maelstrom. "We're in for a rough ride." The ship lurched and shuddered as it plunged deeper into the roiling storm systems, its engines straining against the howling winds and electromagnetic discharges that threatened to tear it asunder. Through the viewports, Arra caught glimpses of the planet's scarred surface, jagged mountain ranges piercing the churning clouds, their peaks forever shrouded in swirling mists and crackling lightning. It was a harsh, unforgiving world, one that seemed to have been shaped by the very fires of conflict that had raged across its face for generations. And yet it was here that their mission would take them, into the heart of the maelstrom, where the lives of their captured comrades hung in the balance. As the Dawnbreaker finally broke through the storm systems, its sensors locking onto the coordinates of the mining facility that was their destination, Arra couldn't help but feel a sense of grim determination settles over her. They had arrived on Agranus Septim, a world caught in the throes of an unending war. But they were Orion soldiers, forged in the crucible of battle and bound by an unbreakable code. And on this day they would face the fires of that crucible once more. The Dawnbreaker touched down in a remote valley, its landing gear sinking into the rust-hued soil of Agranus Septim with a muffled thud. As Arra descended the ramp, her boots crunching on the gritty surface, she was struck by the otherworldly beauty of their surroundings, towering peaks cloaked in swirling mists, their slopes cratered and scarred by the relentless barrage of artillery fire. Yet even in this desolate place, life persisted. Twisted, gnarled vegetation clung to the rocky outcroppings, their vibrant hues a defiant splash of color amidst the monochromatic landscape. The air itself seemed charged with energy, the ever-present crackle of ionic discharges a constant reminder of the planet's volatile nature. Quite the welcome, Matt Marcus grumbled as he joined Arra on the valley floor, his gaze sweeping over the rugged terrain. Almost makes you nostalgic for the good old days of getting shot at, doesn't it? Arra couldn't help but smile at the veteran's dry humor, even as she felt a weight settle upon her shoulders. They had arrived on Agranus Septum, but their mission was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. "All right, people, listen up," she called out, her voice carrying across the valley. "Our first priority is to gather intelligence on the lay of the land, who the players are, what their stakes are in this conflict, and most importantly, any information that could lead us to Jack, Nara, and T." A series of nods rippled through the team, each member acutely aware of the delicate balancing act they would need to perform in order to navigate the tangled web of allegiances and hostilities that characterized the situation on Agranus Septum. Over the next few cycles, Arra and her comrades ventured forth from their secluded landing site, making contact with various factions and groups that had taken up arms in the struggle for control over the planet's precious resources. There were the Malaxians, a brutal and unyielding alien race whose scorched earth tactics had left entire swaths of Agranus Septum's surface little more than smoldering craters. Their motivations were simple: to strip the planet bare and claim its riches for their own, regardless of the cost in lives or the environmental devastation they left in their wake. Then there were the remnants of the Free Miners Collective, a ragtag group of humans and aliens who had once worked the mines of Agranus Septum in relative harmony. Now, they were little more than a scattered resistance force, their ranks decimated by the onslaught of the Malaxians and the ever-present threat of the Kidron Horde, a nomadic warrior cult that worshipped conflict as a sacred rite. As Arra and her team navigated this volatile tapestry of allegiances and enmities, they quickly learned that trust was a rare and fleeting commodity on Agranus Septum. Each encounter, whether with a grizzled free miner or a Kidron warlord, was fraught with the potential for betrayal or violence, the lines between friend and foe ever shifting. Yet they persisted, gathering scraps of intelligence and piecing together the puzzle of their missing comrades' fates. It was a delicate dance, one that required equal parts diplomacy and combat readiness, and it tested the bonds of loyalty and trust that bound Arra's team together. For in the crucible of Agranus Septum's unending conflict, alliances were forged and broken with each passing cycle, and the only constants were the unwavering determination of those who fought for a cause greater than themselves, be it the lure of riches, the pursuit of power, or the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie that drove Arra and her comrades ever deeper into the heart of the storm. The intelligence they had gathered from the beleaguered free miners painted a grim picture. Jack, Nara, and Tiave had last been seen in the custody of a notorious band of Malaxian mercenaries, their fates uncertain but undoubtedly dire. The only lead they had was a rumored outpost in the Kraktis Badlands, a region of Agranus Septum so inhospitable that even the hardiest of the planet's denizens gave it a wide berth. "You're sure about this?" Marcus growled as Arra briefed the team on their next move. "The Badlands are a death trap, even for seasoned veterans like us." Arra met the grizzled soldier's gaze, her expression resolute. "It's the only lead we've got, Marcus. We can't afford to let any opportunity slip through our fingers, not when the lives of our people are at stake." A grim silence fell over the team, each member acutely aware of the risks they were about to take. The Kraktis Badlands were renowned for their treacherous terrain, their jagged rock formations and volatile ionic storms capable of shredding even the most heavily armored vehicles. And yet they steeled themselves for the journey, checking and rechecking their gear and weaponry with a sense of grim determination. For they were Orion soldiers, forged in the crucible of battle and bound by an unbreakable code: no one gets left behind. The journey to the Badlands was arduous, their transport vehicle buffeted by howling winds and electromagnetic discharges that threatened to tear it asunder. Through the viewports, Arra caught glimpses of the desolate landscape, a nightmarish realm of twisted rock spires and deep chasms that seemed to swallow what little light managed to pierce the perpetual storm clouds that shrouded the region. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, their sensors picked up the faint energy signatures of a fortified outpost nestled deep within a labyrinth of canyons and mesas. "That's got to be them," Zara murmured, her fingers dancing across the control console. The energy readings matched the profile of a Malaxian forward operating base. Arra nodded grimly, her gaze sweeping over the assembled team. "All right, people, you know the drill. We go in fast, we go in hard, and we don't stop until we've located our missing comrades." With those words, the team sprang into action, their movements precise and deadly. Zara activated the transport's cloaking systems, rendering them virtually invisible to the outpost's sensors as they made their approach. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a thunderous explosion that rocked the canyon walls, the shock wave slamming into their transport with bone-rattling force. "They've got anti-air defenses," Jax bellowed over the din, his massive frame braced against the inertial dampeners. "I'm reading multiple launch signatures." Arra gritted her teeth, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the control yoke. "Evasive maneuvers. Zara, get me a firing solution on those batteries." The transport twisted and banked, its engines screaming as it weaved through the barrage of incoming fire. Through the viewport, Arra caught glimpses of the outpost, a fortified complex of prefabricated structures and hastily erected defensive emplacements, bristling with weapons and swarming with Malaxian mercenaries. With a deft series of commands, Zara unleashed a volley of precision strikes, the transport's cannons lancing out and obliterating the anti-air batteries. In a series of brilliant explosions. "We're clear for landing," she shouted over the cacophony. "But we'd better make it quick. That firefight is bound to have drawn attention." Arra didn't need to be told twice. With a sharp bank, she brought the transport down in a narrow canyon, the vessel's landing gear scraping against the rocky surface as it skidded to a halt. "Move out," she ordered, her voice laced with urgency. "Rafe, Kell, take point. The rest of you, watch our 6. In a blur of motion, the team disembarked, fanning out and taking up defensive positions amidst the twisted rock formations that surrounded them. Arra felt her heart pounding in her chest, the adrenaline of combat coursing through her veins as she gripped her rifle with a white-knuckled intensity. The first wave of Malaxian mercenaries came surging over the canyon ridge, their guttural war cries echoing off the towering walls. Arra didn't hesitate, her training kicking in as she opened fire, her weapons report blending with the thunderous roar of her comrades' guns. The battle was brutal and unforgiving, a chaotic melee of searing energy blasts and hand-to-hand combat as the Malaxians closed the distance. Arra found herself at the heart of the maelstrom, her movements a blur as she dodged and weaved, her rifle butt cracking against armored carapaces, even as she unleashed volley after volley of precision fire. Through it all, she caught glimpses of her team, their training and unwavering loyalty shining through in the heat of battle. Jax was a whirlwind of destruction, his massive frame shrugging off enemy fire as he laid waste to the Malaxian ranks with his heavy weapons. Kell, ever the sniper, picked off targets with surgical precision, his rifle barking like a vengeful spirit amidst the chaos. And Marcus, the grizzled veteran, fought with a fury that belied his years, his blade flashing in intricate arcs as he cut a swath through the enemy ranks, his guttural battle cries echoing across the canyon like a clarion call to victory. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last of the Malaxian mercenaries fell, their bodies littering the canyon floor. Arra allowed herself a moment to catch her breath, her gaze sweeping over the carnage that surrounded them. "Status report," she barked, her voice laced with the same steely resolve that had carried her through the battle. "We're banged up, but still in one piece," Marcus growled, wiping a trickle of vivid blue blood from a gash on his forehead. "No fatalities, but Jax took a nasty hit. Gonna need Ayla to take a look at him." Arra nodded, her expression grim. The battle had been a costly one, but they had prevailed, their bonds of loyalty and trust forged anew in the crucible of combat. As the team regrouped and tended to their injuries, Arra couldn't help but feel a sense of grim determination settle over her. This had been their first taste of the chaos that consumed Agrana Septum, but it would not be their last. In the aftermath of their fierce battle with the Malaxian mercenaries, Arra and her team found themselves hunkered down in a remote outpost on the fringes of the Kraktia's Badlands. The prefabricated structures, once used as a forward operating base by the mercenaries, now served as their temporary refuge, a tenuous foothold in the heart of Agrana Septum's unforgiving wilderness. As Ayla tended to Jax's wounds, her deft hands working with the precision of a veteran field medic, Arra gathered the rest of the team around the holographic projector table. The display flickered to life, rendering a three-dimensional map of the surrounding region, its topography a jagged maze of canyons and mesas. "All right, people, we've got a toehold, but we're still in the dark about the exact whereabouts of our missing comrades," Arra began, her voice laced with determination. "It's time we start gathering some hard intel." Zara, the team's tech specialist, nodded, her fingers already dancing across her datapad. "I've been monitoring enemy communications since we hit the ground, but so far it's just been a lot of chatter about the firefight and reinforcements being mobilized." "Then we'll have to take a more direct approach," Arra said, her gaze sweeping over the assembled team. "Rafe, you and Kel will head out and make contact with any locals or resistance groups operating in the area. See if you can gather any information on Jack, Nara, and Tiev's last known whereabouts." The infiltration specialist and the sniper exchanged a grim nod, their expressions betraying no hint of the apprehension they undoubtedly felt at the prospect of venturing into the heart of enemy territory. "Marcus, you and I will coordinate surveillance and recon efforts from here," Arra continued. "We need to be monitoring enemy movements and communications around the clock. The moment we get a solid lead, we'll be ready to move." The grizzled veteran's gruff affirmation was punctuated by the muffled thump of an explosion in the distance, a reminder of the ever-present conflict that raged across Agrana Septum's scarred surface. For the next few cycles, the team operated with a quiet intensity, each member playing their role in the delicate dance of intelligence gathering. Zara's fingers flew across her control console, her brow furrowed in concentration as she sifted through intercepted transmissions and decrypted enemy communications. Rafe and Kel, meanwhile, ventured forth into the treacherous wilds, making contact with scattered pockets of resistance fighters and survivors who had managed to eke out a precarious existence amidst the unending carnage. Their interactions were tense affairs, fraught with the ever-present threat of betrayal or ambush. Trust was a rare commodity on Agrana Septum, and even the most innocuous of encounters could turn deadly in the blink of an eye. Yet through a combination of diplomacy, intimidation, and the occasional application of force, the duo managed to gather scraps of information, whispers of captives being held in a heavily fortified Malaxian stronghold, rumors of a brewing conflict between the mercenaries and the Kedron horde over control of the planet's richest mineral deposits. With each new piece of intelligence, the puzzle began to take shape, the team's understanding of the complex web of allegiances and enmities that governed the conflict on Agrana Septum growing ever more intricate. And through it all, the ever-present specter of their missing comrades loomed, driving them onward with an unwavering sense of purpose. For in this crucible of unending war, where trust was a fleeting commodity and the line between friend and foe blurred with each passing cycle, the bonds of loyalty and camaraderie that bound Arra's team together were their only constants, the unbreakable tethers that kept them anchored amidst the chaos. And it was those bonds that would guide them towards their ultimate goal, no matter the obstacles or perils that lay in their path. As the cycles passed and the team's intelligence-gathering efforts bore fruit, it became increasingly clear that navigating the treacherous landscape of Agrana Septum's political terrain would be just as perilous as braving its physical challenges. The various factions vying for control of the planet's resources were locked in a complex web of shifting allegiances and deep-seated enmities, each group motivated by a potent mix of greed, ideology, and the sheer will to survive. It was in this volatile climate that Arra found herself engaging in a delicate dance of diplomacy, reaching out to potential allies and brokers of information in the hopes of gaining a foothold in the ever-shifting sands of Agrana Septum's power struggles. One such meeting took place in the ruins of an abandoned mining colony, the crumbling structures bearing the scars of countless battles fought over the precious minerals that lay beneath the planet's surface. Arra's contact was Kirill, a grizzled veteran of the once formidable Free Miners Collective, now reduced to little more than a ragtag band of survivors eking out an existence in the fringes of the conflict zones. As Arra and Marcus made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the colony, their footsteps echoing off the cracked permacrete walls, they could feel the weight of the risks they were taking. Trust was a fragile commodity on Agranus Septum, and even the slightest misstep could spell disaster. Finally, they reached the rendezvous point, a cavernous chamber that had once served as a refinery, its towering machines now rusted and silent. Kirill was waiting for them, his weathered features etched with a lifetime of hardship and mistrust. "You're the ones looking for information on the Malaxian stronghold," he growled, his voice a raspy baritone that seemed to carry the weight of the world upon it. Arra nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "We are, and we're prepared to compensate you for any intelligence you can provide." Kirill's eyes narrowed, sizing up the two Orion soldiers with a mixture of wariness and begrudging respect. "Information ain't cheap on this rock, but I reckon you already know that." The negotiations that followed were a delicate dance, each party probing for weaknesses and hidden motivations, even as they ostensibly sought common ground. Arra held her own, her training in diplomacy and negotiation proving invaluable as she navigated the treacherous currents of Agranus Septum's political landscape. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of posturing and veiled threats, a tentative agreement was reached. Kirill would provide them with the coordinates of the Malaxian stronghold, as well as any intelligence he could gather on the movements and activities of the mercenary forces. In exchange, Arra and her team would assist in disrupting a Kydron horde supply line that had been choking off the Free Miners' already tenuous lifeline. It was a fragile alliance, one born of necessity and desperation rather than any true sense of trust or camaraderie. But in the crucible of Agranus Septum's unending conflict, such tenuous bonds were often the only thing keeping the fragmented resistance forces from being swept away entirely. As Arra and Marcus made their way back to the team's temporary base, the coordinates of their ultimate objective burning like a beacon in their minds, they couldn't help but feel a sense of grim determination settle over them. They had taken the first steps towards unraveling the tangled knot of allegiances and hostilities that governed Agranus Septum, but they knew that the road ahead would only grow more treacherous. The tenuous alliance with Kirill, the grizzled veteran of the Free Miners Collective, had been a lifeline for Arra and her team. The intelligence he provided had been instrumental in their efforts to locate the Malaxian stronghold where their captured comrades were being held. It was a fragile trust, born of necessity in the harsh realities of Agranus Septum's unending conflict, but it had been a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. That hope was shattered in an instant. The joint operation had been meticulously planned, every detail accounted for and every contingency prepared for. Arra's team, in coordination with a hand-picked group of Free Miners, was to strike at a key Malaxian supply depot, disrupting the flow of weapons and resources to the mercenary forces. But as the team moved into position, their cloaked transport gliding silently through the canyons of the Kraktis Badlands, the trap was sprung. The first salvo of energy blasts slammed into the transport shields, the force of the impact throwing Arra and her comrades against their restraints. Warning klaxons blared, the cockpit awash in the crimson glow of emergency lighting. "It's an ambush," Zora shouted, her fingers flying across the control console as she desperately tried to evade the incoming fire. Multiple contacts closing fast. Through the viewport, Arra caught a glimpse of their attackers, a swarm of heavily armed Malaxian strike craft, their angular silhouettes cutting through the swirling mists like predatory beasts. In there, amidst the chaos, was a sight that made Arra's blood run cold. A Free Miner transport, its weathered hull adorned with the unmistakable markings of Kirill's faction, was among the attackers, its weapons unleashing a relentless barrage upon the beleaguered team. "Kirill, you treacherous bastard," Marcus snarled, his fists clenched in rage. "He sold us out." The betrayal cut deep, a searing reminder of the harsh truth that on Agranus Septum, alliances were as shifting and treacherous as the sands themselves. But there was no time for recrimination or regret. The team's very survival hung in the balance. Evasive maneuvers, Arra barked. Her training taking over, she pushed aside the shock and fury of the betrayal. Jax, Kel manned the gun turrets. Zara, get us out of here. The transport lurched and spun, the inertial dampeners straining to compensate as Zara pushed the craft to its limits. The gun turrets roared to life, Jax and Kel's precise fire cutting through the Malaxian formation, sending strike craft tumbling from the sky in blossoms of flame and debris. But the enemy's numbers were too great, their onslaught relentless. The transport's shields flickered and died, the hull buckling under the unrelenting barrage of energy blasts and ballistic rounds. "We're losing power," Zara cried, her voice edged with desperation. "I can't keep her in the air much longer." Zara gritted her teeth, her mind racing as she sought a solution, a way out of the deadly trap that had ensnared them. And then, amidst the chaos and the fury, she sought a narrow canyon, its jagged walls offering a fleeting chance at escape. "There," she shouted, pointing to the canyon. "Take us in, Zara. Hug the walls and use the terrain to break their line of sight." It was a desperate gambit, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse that would push the transport and its crew to their very limits. But it was their only chance. With a white-knuckled grip on the control yoke, Zara sent the transport hurtling into the canyon, the craft's battered hull scraping against the rocky walls as they wove through the labyrinthine passages. The Malaxian strike craft, their bulkier frames ill-suited for such tight quarters, were forced to break off their pursuit, their frustrated comm chatter echoing over the airwaves. But Kirill's transport, smaller and more maneuverable, stayed doggedly on their tail, its weapons spitting bursts of fire that filled the canyon with searing light and deafening thunder. "We can't shake him," Zara cried, her voice strained with the effort of keeping the transport aloft. "He's got us locked." Zara's mind raced, a desperate plan forming even as the transport shuddered and bucked under the onslaught. With a quick series of commands, she diverted power from the engines to the aft shields, the glowing energy barriers flickering to life, just as Kirill's transport unleashed another volley. The gambit worked. The shields held just long enough for Zara to execute a daring maneuver, the transport corkscrewing through a narrow gap in the canyon walls and emerging into open sky, leaving their pursuers momentarily lost in the maze of rocky passages. As the team's ragged cheers filled the cockpit, Arra felt a grim sense of determination settle over her. They had survived the ambush, but the betrayal had left its mark, a searing reminder of the harsh realities of their mission. Trust, it seemed, was a luxury they could ill afford on Agranus Septim. The only bonds they could rely on were those forged in the crucible of battle, the unbreakable ties that bound them as comrades, as family. And as the battered transport limped its way back to their temporary refuge, the weight of that realization hung heavy upon them all. The path ahead would be fraught with peril, the enemies arrayed against them as numerous as the stars themselves. But they would face those trials together, united by the unbreakable code that had guided them through the darkest of times. No one gets left behind. In the aftermath of the harrowing ambush, Arra's team found themselves back in the relative safety of their temporary base, licking their wounds and grappling with the bitter sting of betrayal. The once bustling mining outpost now seemed eerily quiet, the weight of their brush with death hanging heavy in the recycled air. As Ayla tended to the team's injuries, her deft hands stitching gashes and applying salves with practiced precision, Arra found herself wandering the abandoned corridors, her mind churning with the events of the past few hours. It was there, in the shadowed recesses of the outpost's dilapidated mess hall, that she found Marcus. The grizzled veteran sat alone, his weathered features illuminated by the flickering glow of a portable lantern, a half-empty bottle of Orion whiskey clasped in his gnarled hands. "Pull up a chair. V down," he grumbled, his voice rough with fatigue and emotion. "Might as well join me in drowning our sorrows." Arra hesitated for a moment, the weight of command warring with the desire for the simple comfort of camaraderie. But as she looked upon the haggard visage of her oldest friend and mentor, she knew that rank and protocol had no place in this moment. She sat, accepting the proffered bottle with a nod of gratitude. The whiskey burned as it went down, a welcome warmth, amidst the chill of their surroundings. For a long moment they sat in silence, the only sound the distant hum of the outpost's life support systems. And then, with a heavy sigh, Marcus began to speak. "I ever tell you about the Battle of Naxos Prime?" he asked, his gaze distant, as if seeing through the rusted walls of the mess hall to some far-off battlefield. Arra shook her head, sensing the weight of the tale that was to come. "It was a bloodbath," Marcus continued, his voice low and haunted. "The Kydron horde had the planet in a stranglehold, their berserkers tearing through our lines like tissue paper. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and damned near out of hope." He took a long pull from the bottle, his eyes glinting with the ghosts of memory. "That's when your old man pulled off the craziest stunt I've ever seen. He led a squad of infiltrators right into the heart of the Horde's command post, fought his way to their warlord, and took the bastard's head clean off with a monomolecular blade." Arra felt a swell of pride at the mention of her father's exploits, tempered by the knowledge of the toll such battles had taken on the man she had known. "It turned the tide, bought us just enough time to evacuate the civilians and fall back to a defensive perimeter. But the cost." Marcus's voice trailed off, his gaze turning inward. "I lost a lot of good soldiers that day, Viden. Friends, comrades, family." The weight of those losses hung heavy in the air, a palpable presence in the shadowed recesses of the mess hall. "I thought I was done with all this," Marcus continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thought I could leave the ghosts of the past behind, find some measure of peace in the quiet of retirement." He looked up then, his eyes meeting Arra's with a fierce intensity. "But then you came knocking, with your damned fool crusade to save your friends. And I knew I couldn't let you face this alone." Arra felt a lump form in her throat, the weight of Marcus's words settling upon her like a mantle of responsibility. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she began, her voice rough with emotion. "I never meant to drag you back into this life, to make you face those ghosts again." But the old soldier shook his head, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Don't be, Viden. This is where I belong, fighting alongside soldiers like you, like your father. It's the only life I've ever known, the only one that ever made sense." He reached out then, clasping Arra's shoulder with a grip that was at once firm and reassuring. "We'll get through this, kid. We'll find your friends, and we'll make the bastards who took them pay. And then—" His voice trailed off, the unspoken promise hanging in the air between them. And then, perhaps, they could both find the peace they sought, the solace of a life beyond the battlefield. But for now they had a mission to complete, a debt of honor to be paid. And as Arra looked upon the grizzled visage of her mentor, she knew that she could face whatever trials lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that she did not face them alone. For in the crucible of war, it was the bonds of camaraderie, the ties of shared sacrifice and unbreakable loyalty, that saw them through the darkest of times. And with Marcus at her side, Arra knew that no force in the galaxy could stand against them. With their resolve tempered by the bitter lessons of betrayal, and the bonds of camaraderie reaffirmed, Arra and her team set forth once more into the perilous wilds of Agranus Septum. The intelligence gleaned from their ill-fated alliance with Kirill had not been entirely in vain. They had a lead, however tenuous, on the location of their captured comrades. But the path to the Malaxian stronghold was fraught with danger, a gauntlet of hazards both natural and artificial that tested the team's skills and resolve at every turn. The first challenge came in the form of a massive ion storm, its swirling vortexes of charged particles and electromagnetic fields threatening to tear the Dawnbreaker asunder as they attempted to navigate the treacherous canyons of the Krakti's Badlands. "Shields are holding," but barely Zara shouted over the cacophony of alarms and straining bulkheads. "We can't take much more of this." Arra gritted her teeth, her knuckles white on the control yoke as she fought to keep the ship on course. The viewports were awash in a maelstrom of seething energy, the storm's fury battering the Dawnbreaker's hull with relentless force. But through the chaos, Arra's training held true. With a deft series of maneuvers, she threaded the ship through the narrowest of gaps in the canyon walls, using the rocky outcroppings as a buffer against the worst of the storm's wrath. It was a harrowing passage, a test of skill and nerve that left the team shaken but unbroken. And as they emerged from the storm's clutches, the battered hull of the Dawnbreaker, glinting in the wan light of Agranus Septim's distant sun, they allowed themselves a moment of hard-won respite. But the trials were far from over. As they drew closer to the coordinates of the Malaxian stronghold, the team found themselves forced to abandon the relative safety of the Dawnbreaker, the ship's profile too conspicuous to risk detection by the enemy's sensor nets. And so they set out on foot, picking their way through a labyrinth of jagged canyons and wind-scoured plateaus, the weight of their mission heavy upon their shoulders. It was here, amidst the stark beauty of Agranus Septim's rugged terrain, that the next trial found them. Pulled up, Rafe hissed, his hand raised in warning as he crouched at the edge of a narrow defile. "I'm picking up seismic activity, and a lot of it. Something big is headed our way." No sooner had the words left his lips than the ground beneath their feet began to tremble, a low rumble building to a deafening roar, as a massive shape burst from the earth in a spray of rock and debris. Lion's Jax bellowed, his heavy weapons already blazing, as he opened fire on the monstrous creature that reared before them. Arra had heard tales of the antlions, the gargantuan insectoid predators that lurked beneath the sands of Agranus Septim's wastelands. But nothing could have prepared her for the sheer scale of the beast that now towered over them, its chitinous hide glistening with a sickly sheen, its mandibles dripping with corrosive ichor. The battle was joined in a heartbeat, the team's weapons roaring to life as they fought to keep the creature at bay. But for every searing blast of energy that scorched its hide, the antlion seemed to grow more enraged, its attacks becoming ever more frenzied and unpredictable. It was Kell, the unflappable sniper, who finally turned the tide. With a coolness born of long years of training, he waited for the perfect moment, his rifle trained on the antlion's gaping maw as it reared back to strike. The shot, when it came, was a thing of terrible beauty, a lance of pure energy that pierced the creature's skull and sent it crashing to the ground in a twitching heap of lifeless chitin. The team stood panting in the aftermath, their armor scorched and battered, but their spirits unbroken. They had faced death in the form of a living nightmare, and they had emerged victorious. But even as they caught their breath, the weight of their mission pressed upon them anew. The Malaxian stronghold lay ahead, its secrets and its captives awaiting their liberation. And so, with a grim determination, they pressed on, the close calls and narrow escapes of their journey only serving to harden their resolve. For they were Orion's finest, bound by a code of honor and a bond of camaraderie that no force in the galaxy could break. And they would not rest until their mission was complete, until their comrades were safe and the enemies of peace and justice lay broken at their feet. The journey through the treacherous wilds of Agranus Septim had been a crucible, a gauntlet of perils and close calls that had tested Arra and her team to the limits of their endurance. But through it all, they had persevered, driven by the unbreakable bonds of loyalty and the burning need to bring their captured comrades home. And now, as they crested a jagged ridge and gazed upon the sprawling expanse of the Malaxian stronghold, they knew that their trials had not been in vain. The fortress was an imposing sight, a vast complex of fortified bunkers and towering gun emplacements, all encircled by a bristling perimeter of energy barriers and sensor arrays. It was a bastion of the enemy's power, a symbol of their iron grip on the war-torn world of Agranus Septim. But to Arra and her team, it represented something else entirely: hope. Hope for their captured friends, hope for the countless innocents caught in the crossfire of the planet's unending conflicts, hope for a future free from the tyranny of greed and oppression. There it is, Marcus rumbled, his voice tight with a mixture of anticipation and grim resolve, the belly of the beast. Arra nodded, her gaze never wavering from the distant fortifications. And somewhere in there, Jack, Nara, and Tiev are waiting for us. The mention of their comrades' names sent a ripple of determination through the team, a palpable reminder of the stakes they faced. "So what's the plan?" Boss Rafe asked, his eyes glinting with a predatory light. "We gonna go in guns blazing, or do this the sneaky way?" Arra considered for a moment, her mind racing with the variables and contingencies of the mission ahead. The Malaxian stronghold was a formidable target, its defenses designed to repel all but the most determined of assaults. A frontal attack would be suicide, a waste of lives and resources that they could ill afford. But there was another way, a path that had opened up to them through the tireless efforts of Zara and the invaluable intelligence provided by Marcus's contacts in the Free Miners Collective. Neither Arra said at last, a slow smile spreading across her face. We're going to use their own weapons against them. She turned to Zara, the tech specialist's eyes already alight with understanding. You've cracked their comm encryptions. Zara nodded, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface of her wrist-mounted computer. And their security protocols. We should be able to slip a team in through one of their supply convoys, disguised as Malaxian logistics personnel. Marcus grunted, his expression a mixture of approval and concern. It's a big risk, if they catch on to us. They won't, Arra said, her voice ringing with a confidence born of absolute faith in her team. We've come too far to fail now. This is our chance to strike a blow against the Malaxians and bring our people home. And we're going to take it. The plan was set in motion with a flurry of activity, each member of the team falling into their assigned roles with the practiced ease of seasoned professionals. Zara worked her technical magic, crafting flawless false identities and security clearances for the infiltration team. Rafe and Kell, the masters of stealth and subterfuge, took point on the physical disguises, transforming themselves and their comrades into the spitting images of Malaxian soldiers. And Arra pored over every scrap of intelligence they had gathered, every fragment of data and whispered rumor, searching for the key that would unlock the secrets of the Malaxian stronghold and lead them to their captured friends. It was a tense and frenetic time, a race against the clock as they prepared to embark on the most daring operation of their lives. But through it all, the team remained focused, united by their common cause and the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie that had seen them through so many trials before. And when the time came, when the disguised infiltration team boarded the supply convoy and set out across the war-torn wastelands of Agrana Septum, they did so with a sense of purpose and resolve that no force in the galaxy could shake. They were Orion's finest, the tip of the spear in the fight against tyranny and oppression, and they would not rest until their mission was complete, until their friends were safe and the enemies of justice lay shattered at their feet. The Malaxian stronghold loomed before them, a bastion of the enemy's power and a symbol of the challenges that lay ahead. But Arra and her team were ready, their spirits forged in the crucible of adversity and their hearts alight with the fire of righteous determination. And as they passed through the gates of the fortress, their disguises holding true and their purpose unwavering, they knew that they were one step closer to their goal, one step closer to their discovery that would change the course of their mission and the fate of Agrana Septum forever. The supply convoy rumbled through the gates of the Malaxian stronghold, a procession of heavily armored vehicles and grav trains laden with the lifeblood of the mercenary army. Amidst the organized chaos of the loading docks, a quartet of figures moved with purposeful strides, their Malaxian uniforms and bearing blending seamlessly with the sea of activity around them. Arra felt her heart pounding beneath the unfamiliar weight of the enemy's armor, her every instinct screaming for action, even as she maintained the facade of a loyal Malaxian soldier. Beside her, Marcus, Rafe, and Kell moved with the same coiled intensity, their eyes scanning the bustling crowds for any sign of suspicion or recognition. They had breached the outer perimeter, but the true test of their infiltration still lay ahead. Zara, wherein Arra murmured, her voice barely audible over the comm link concealed within her helmet. Guide us to the detention center. Affirmative came the reply, Zara's voice cool and precise even as her fingers danced across the holographic displays of the Dawnbreaker's command center. Uploading schematics to your HUDs now. Remember, you'll need to pass through the central security hub to reach the detention levels. Arra acknowledged the information with a terse nod, her eyes already tracing the glowing lines of the fortress's labyrinthine interior as they unspooled across her visor. They set out across the vast expanse of the loading docks, their steps measured and purposeful, the very image of Malaxian discipline. Around them, the ordered frenzy of the supply operations continued unabated, the clank of loading mechs and the hiss of repulsor fields filling the air with a constant thrum of activity. But as they approached the towering blast doors that marked the entrance to the stronghold's interior, a new sound intruded upon the cacophony, the sharp, staccato bark of an alarm, its wailing cry rising in pitch and urgency with every passing second. Attention all personnel, a harsh voice crackled across the fortress's PA system. Intruder alert in Sector 7G. Security teams to full readiness. This is not a drill. Arra felt a surge of adrenaline flood her veins, her grip tightening on the unfamiliar weight of the Malaxian pulse rifle as she scanned the suddenly tense crowds for any sign of a threat. Had they been discovered? Had some flaw in their disguises or forged credentials given them away? The questions raced through her mind even as she fought to maintain the outward calm of a seasoned Malaxian trooper. But as the security teams rushed past them, their focus entirely consumed by the distant threat of Sector 7G, Arra felt a flicker of hope amidst the tension. Perhaps this was the break they needed, the window of opportunity to slip past the fortress's heightened security and make their way to the detention levels undetected. She caught Marcus's eye, the veteran's gaze sharp and calculating beneath the visor of his helmet. A brief nod, a subtle hand signal, and the infiltration team was moving once more, their steps quick and purposeful as they slipped through the chaos and into the labyrinthine depths of the stronghold. The corridors beyond the blast doors were a stark contrast to the ordered bustle of the loading docks, all gleaming metal and harsh, artificial light. Malaxian soldiers and security drones moved with clipped efficiency, their attention still consumed by the distant alarm and the threat it represented. Guided by Zara's schematics and their own finely honed instincts, Arra and her team navigated the twisting passageways, their progress marked by a tense silence broken only by the muffled tread of their boots on the unyielding floor. At last they reached the central security hub, a vast chamber filled with banks of monitoring stations and holographic displays, the nerve center of the Malaxian fortress's formidable defenses. Laying there, standing at the center of it all, was a figure that made Arra's blood run cold. Clad in the ornate armor of a Malaxian commander, his face a cruel mask of cybernetic implants and ritual scars, stood Cormac Virak, the infamous warlord whose name was spoken in hushed whispers across a dozen systems. Arra had heard the stories of Virak's brutality, of the atrocities he and his elite cadre of warriors had unleashed upon the people of Agranis Septum. To see him here, in the heart of the Malaxian stronghold, was a chilling reminder of the stakes they faced and the depths of the enemy's ruthlessness. But there was no time for fear or hesitation. Their comrades' lives hung in the balance, and every moment they delayed brought them closer to discovery and failure. With a silent nod to her team, Arra stepped forward, her disguise and bearing flawless, as she approached the security station at the center of the room. "Commander Virak," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of Malaxian deference. "We have orders to transfer a priority prisoner to the interrogation cells. I need access to the detention level immediately." The warlord's gaze was a physical weight, his cybernetic eyes seeming to pierce through the layers of Arra's disguise and straight into her soul. For a moment that stretched into eternity, she was certain that he had seen through their ruse, that the alarm would sound and the room would erupt into a maelstrom of blaster fire and blood. But then, miraculously, Virak nodded, his attention already turning back to the holographic displays and the distant threat still consuming the fortress's attention. "Access granted," he growled, his voice a grating rasp of synthetic vocal cords. "But be quick about it. I want all security personnel at full readiness until this intruder is found and dealt with." Arra nodded, her relief a palpable force, as she and her team moved past the security station and into the detention-level access corridor. They had passed the first hurdle, but the true test still lay ahead, beyond the heavy blast doors and the layers of security that separated them from their captured comrades. But they were ready, their spirits steeled by the trials they had endured and the unbreakable bonds of loyalty that guided them. And as the doors slid open with a hiss of hydraulics, revealing the grim expanse of the Malaxian prison complex, Arra knew that they would not falter, that they would fight with every ounce of skill and courage they possessed to bring their friends home and strike a blow against the heart of the enemy's power. The infiltration had begun, and the fate of Agranis Septum hung in the balance. The detention level was a grim labyrinth of steel and shadows, a place where hope went to die, amidst the cries of the damned and the crackle of energy fields. Arra and her team moved through the twisting corridors with a tense, coiled precision, their weapons at the ready, and their senses straining for any sign of the enemy's presence. But as they delved deeper into the heart of the Malaxian prison complex, a growing sense of unease began to settle over them. The cell blocks they passed were eerily silent, the air heavy with a palpable sense of wrongness that set their nerves on edge. "Something's not right," Marcus murmured, his grizzled features tight with suspicion beneath the visor of his helmet. "Where are all the guards? The prisoners?" Arra felt a chill run down her spine at the veteran's words, her own instincts screaming a silent warning. But there was no time to dwell on the implications, no time to do anything but press forward and pray that they could reach their comrades before whatever lurked in the shadows made its presence known. And then, as they rounded a final corner and emerged into a vast, circular chamber, the trap was sprung. The room erupted in a maelstrom of blaster fire and searing energy beams, the walls and floor shuddering under the impact of high-explosive rounds. Arra and her team dove for cover, their own weapons blazing as they fought to return fire against the swarm of Malaxian soldiers that had appeared as if from nowhere. "It's a setup," Rafe snarled, his voice ragged with anger and exertion as he unleashed a barrage of ion bolts into the enemy ranks. "They knew we were coming." Arra gritted her teeth, her mind racing as she sought to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed them. Had they been betrayed once again? Had some flaw in their plan or their disguises tipped the enemy off to their presence? There was no time to ponder such questions, no time to do anything but fight with every ounce of skill and determination they possessed. Amidst the smoke and the fury of the battle, Arra caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the chamber, a group of figures, chained and beaten but alive, being dragged towards a heavily guarded doorway by a cadre of Malaxian warriors. "There," she shouted, her voice rising above the din of combat. "Jack, Nara, and TV are here." The sight of their captured comrades, so close and yet so far, sent a surge of renewed determination through the infiltration team. With a roar of defiance, they redoubled their efforts, pouring fire into the enemy ranks even as they fought to close the distance and reach their beleaguered friends. But the Malaxians were relentless, their numbers seeming to swell with every passing moment as reinforcements poured into the chamber from every direction. For every foe they felled, two more sprang up to take their place, their weapons spitting death and destruction with every passing second. Arra felt the icy claws of despair begin to sink into her heart as she saw her team being pushed back, their line of advance faltering under the sheer weight of the enemy's numbers. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and rapidly running out of options. But even as the battle seemed lost, a new sound intruded upon the chaos, the deep, thrumming roar of heavy engines and the shuddering impact of high-yield explosives. "The cavalry has arrived," Zara's voice crackled across the comm link, triumphant and giddy with relief. "Hold tight, Arra, we're coming in hot." And with a thunderous crash, the wall of the chamber exploded inward, revealing the battered but unbroken form of the Dawnbreaker hovering beyond, its weapons blazing as it poured fire into the ranks of the stunned Malaxians. The tide of battle turned in an instant, the infiltration team surging forward with renewed vigor as their comrades in arms laid down a blistering barrage of covering fire. Arra's heart soared with relief and fierce pride as she saw Jax and the others emerge from the Dawnbreaker's loading ramp, their armor scorched and battered, but their eyes alight with the fire of righteous fury. Together they carved a path through the enemy ranks, their weapons and their skill forged in the crucible of a dozen battles. And at last they reached their captured comrades, the chains that bound them, shattering under the onslaught of Marcus's plasma blade. "Took you long enough," Jack quipped, his voice weak but his spirit unbroken as Arra hauled him to his feet. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten about us." Arra felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside, a release of tension and fear and the sheer, giddy relief of triumph against impossible odds. "Never," she said, her voice fierce with conviction. "We never leave one of our own behind." And as they fought their way back to the waiting Dawnbreaker, their ranks swelled by the addition of their liberated friends. Arra felt a sense of invincible purpose settle over her. They had struck a blow against the heart of the Malaxian war machine, had snatched victory from the jaws of defeat through sheer grit and unbreakable loyalty. But the battle was far from over. They had their comrades back, but they were still deep in enemy territory, with the full might of the Malaxian forces bearing down upon them. The fight within the fortress had been won, but the greater struggle for the fate of Agranas Septim still hung in the balance. And as the Dawnbreaker surged forward, its engines roaring with defiant power, Arra knew that they would need every ounce of courage and skill they possessed to see their mission through to its end. But they would not falter, would not yield in the face of the coming storm. For they were Orion's finest, bound by ties of blood and honor that no force in the galaxy could break. And they would fight, to the last breath and the last bullet, to see their people safe and their enemies brought to justice. The Dawnbreaker shuddered and bucked as it tore through the atmosphere of Agranas Septim, its hull scorched and dented from the furious barrage of enemy fire. In the cockpit, Zara fought to keep the ship on course, her hands flying across the controls with a desperate, frenetic energy. Behind her, the rescued captives huddled in the main hold, their faces gaunt and haunted by the horrors they had endured. Jack, Nara, and T, the comrades Arra and her team had fought so hard to save, were battered and bruised, but alive, their spirits unbroken despite the trials they had faced. Arra moved among them, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love as she tended to their wounds and offered what comfort she could. These were her people, her family in all but blood, and the sight of them safe and whole filled her with a joy that no words could express. But even as they tended to their own, the crew of the Dawnbreaker knew that their ordeal was far from over. The Malaxian forces were in hot pursuit, their ships and fighters swarming through the skies in a relentless tide of steel and fire. "They're gaining on us," Marcus shouted from his position at the tactical console, his voice rough with exhaustion and grim determination. "We need to get some distance, find a place to lay low and regroup." Arra nodded, her mind racing as she considered their options. They were deep in enemy territory, with precious few allies and a dwindling supply of fuel and ammunition. They needed a safe haven, a place where they could rest and heal and plan their next move. And then, like a bolt of inspiration, the answer came to her. "The Krakdi's Badlands," she said, her voice ringing with a sudden, fierce conviction. "We'll lose them in the canyons and the storm systems. It's the last place they'll think to look for us." Zara shot her a skeptical look, her brow furrowed with concern. "Arra, those canyons are a death trap. The ion storms alone could tear us apart, never mind the Malaxians." But Arra was adamant, her eyes alight with a fire that would not be denied. "It's our only chance. We have to trust in our skills and our ship. We've come too far to fail now." And so, with a grim nod of assent, Zara turned the Dawnbreaker's nose towards the seething maelstrom of the Krakdi's Badlands, the ship's engines roaring with defiant power as they plunged headlong into the heart of the storm. The pursuit was relentless, a deadly game of cat and mouse played out amidst the howling winds and crackling lightning of Agranas Septim's most unforgiving terrain. The Malaxian ships were faster and more heavily armed, their pilots driven by a fanatical devotion to their cause and a ruthless disregard for their own lives. But the crew of the Dawnbreaker were fueled by something stronger than mere fanaticism, a bond of love and loyalty that no force in the galaxy could break. And with every daring maneuver and desperate gambit, they pushed themselves and their ship to the very limits of their capabilities, their skills honed to a razor's edge by the trials they had endured. Zara flew like a woman possessed, her hands moving in a blur, as she wove the Dawnbreaker through the jagged canyons and swirling vortexes of the Badlands. Beside her, Marcus manned the weapons, his grim face lit by the fiery glow of the ship's cannons, as he poured a relentless stream of death and destruction into the pursuing enemy. And in the heart of the ship, Arra and her team tended to their wounded and their weary, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they had achieved the impossible, that they had struck a blow against the heart of the enemy, and liberated their captured comrades from the very jaws of hell. It was a reunion that none of them would ever forget, a moment of pure, unadulterated joy amidst the chaos and the carnage of war. Jack, Nara, and TV, battered and bruised but alive, their eyes shining with gratitude and fierce, unbreakable pride. "You came for us," TV whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion, as he clasped Arra's hand in his own. "You never gave up." Arra felt the tears welling up in her eyes, a surge of love and relief so powerful that it threatened to overwhelm her. "Never," she said, her voice fierce with conviction. "We're family, TV. We'll always come for you." And as the dawnbreaker streaked through the storm-racked skies of Agranus Septum, its hull battered but unbroken, its crew bloodied but unbowed, Arra felt a sense of invincible purpose settle over her. They had achieved the impossible, had snatched victory from the very jaws of defeat. And though the road ahead was long and fraught with peril, she knew that they would face it together, bound by ties of love and loyalty that no force in the galaxy could break. The rescue was complete, but the fight for Agranus Septum had only just begun. And as the dawnbreaker vanished into the seething heart of the Cractus Badlands, Arra knew that they would need every ounce of courage and skill they possessed to see their mission through to its end. But they would not falter, would not yield in the face of the coming storm. For they were Orion's finest, the unbreakable few, and they would fight to their last breath to see their people safe and their enemies brought to justice. The dawnbreaker shuddered as another volley of enemy fire impacted against its weakening shields. Inside the battered ship, Arra and her team were a flurry of activity, desperately trying to keep their vessel together long enough to escape the relentless Malaxian pursuit. Shields down to 20%, Zara shouted over the blaring alarms. "We can't take much more of this." Arra gritted her teeth, her mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. They had managed to rescue Jack, Nara, and Tiev, but now they were trapped deep within enemy territory, with the full might of the Malaxian war machine bearing down upon them. "We need to find a way to shake them off," Marcus growled, his eyes glued to the tactical display. "Make a run for the nearest jump point and get the hell out of this system." But Arra shook her head, a sudden spark of inspiration igniting in her mind. "No," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound determination. "We're not running. We're going to hit them where it hurts." The others looked at her in surprise, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. But Arra was already moving, her fingers flying across the ship's control panels, as she brought up a schematic of the Malaxian stronghold they had just escaped. "The fortress is powered by a central reactor core," she explained, her eyes blazing with intensity. "If we can get close enough to detonate a high-yield explosive, we can cripple their defenses and give ourselves a fighting chance to escape." There was a moment of stunned silence as the others digested her words. It was a desperate plan, a suicide mission that would pit them against the full might of the Malaxian forces. But as they looked around at each other, at the battered but unbroken faces of their comrades, they knew that it was the only way. Iman Jax rumbled, his massive frame tense with anticipation. "Let's give these bastards a taste of their own medicine." One by one, the others nodded their assent, their eyes alight with the same fierce determination that burned in Arra's heart. They were Orion's finest, bound by ties of blood and honor that no force in the galaxy could break. And they would fight to their last breath to see their mission through. The plan was set in motion with a flurry of activity, each member of the team falling into their assigned roles with the practiced ease of seasoned warriors. Zara worked to reinforce the Dawnbreaker's failing shields, coaxing every last ounce of power from the ship's strained systems. Rafe and Kel readied the explosives, their faces grim as they armed the deadly devices that would be their ticket to freedom. In Arra pored over the schematics of the Malaxian fortress, her mind racing as she plotted their course through the enemy's defenses. It would be a gauntlet of fire and fury, a desperate race against time, and the relentless tide of Malaxian ships that sought to destroy them. But they would not falter, would not yield in the face of the impossible odds arrayed against them. For they had already achieved the impossible, had struck a blow against the very heart of the enemy's power, and rescued their captured comrades from the jaws of hell. And as the Dawnbreakers streaked towards the looming fortress, its hull battered but unbroken, its crew bloodied but unbowed, Arra felt a sense of invincible purpose settle over her. This was their moment, their chance to strike a decisive blow against the forces of tyranny, and oppression that sought to crush them underfoot. The escape plan was set, the pieces in motion. And though the road ahead was fraught with peril, Arra knew that they would face it together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie that had seen them through the darkest of times. They were the unbreakable few, the last line of defense against the encroaching darkness, and they would fight with every ounce of strength and courage they possessed to see the light of freedom shine once more across the stars. The Malaxian fortress loomed before them, a bastion of the enemy's power and a symbol of the impossible odds they faced. But Arra and her team were ready, their spirits forged in the crucible of adversity and their hearts alight with the fire of righteous determination. And as the Dawnbreaker hurtled towards the heart of the enemy's stronghold, its engines roaring with defiant power, they knew that they would not falter, would not fail in the face of the coming storm. The escape plan was in motion. The final battle was about to begin. The Dawnbreaker shuddered as it tore through the atmosphere of Agrana Septum, its engines straining to maintain the breakneck pace of their desperate escape. Behind them, the sky was alight with the fury of the Malaxian pursuit, a swarm of enemy ships and fighters that seemed to stretch to the very horizon. In the cockpit, Zara fought to keep the ship on course, her hands flying across the controls with a deft, frenetic energy. Beside her, Marcus manned the weapons, his face grim as he poured a relentless stream of fire into the pursuing enemy. But even as they fought with every ounce of skill and determination they possessed, Arra knew that it was only a matter of time before the Malaxians overwhelmed them. The Dawnbreaker was a formidable ship, but it was battered and bruised, its systems pushed to the very brink of collapse by the relentless pursuit. They needed a miracle, a stroke of luck or a twist of fate that would give them the edge they so desperately needed. And as if in answer to her unspoken prayers, the miracle came. "Incoming transmission," Zara shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos of the pursuit. It's the free miners." Arra felt a surge of hope and disbelief as the familiar voice of Chiral crackled over the comm link. The grizzled veteran had betrayed them once before, had sold them out to the Malaxians for the promise of wealth and power. But now, it seemed, he had had a change of heart. "Arra, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," Chiral said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I can't stand by and watch as the Malaxians slaughter innocents any longer. The free miners are with you, and we're going to buy you the time you need to escape." And with those words, a second miracle unfolded. From the depths of the Krakti's Badlands, a swarm of ships emerged battered and rugged, but bristling with weaponry and alive with the fire of righteous fury. They were the free miners, the ragtag band of rebels and outlaws who had once been the backbone of Agrana Septum's economy, now united in their hatred of the Malaxian oppressors. With a roar of engines and a blaze of weapons fire, the free miners tore into the Malaxian pursuit, their ships darting and weaving through the enemy formation with a reckless, suicidal bravery. The Malaxians, caught off guard by the sudden assault, faltered in their pursuit, their formation breaking apart as they scrambled to engage the new threat. And in that moment of chaos and confusion, the Dawnbreaker made its move. With a burst of speed that pushed its engines to the very limit, the ship tore through the heart of the Malaxian formation, its hull scraping against the jagged edges of enemy ships as it fought its way clear. Weapons fire slammed against its shields, alarms blaring and systems screaming in protest, but still the Dawnbreaker pushed on, determined to break free of the deadly trap that had ensnared it. And then, with a final desperate lurch, they were clear. The Malaxian ships fell away behind them, their pursuit faltering as the free miners pressed their attack with a savage, unyielding fury. The Dawnbreaker, battered but unbroken, streaked towards the safety of open space, its crew bloodied but unbowed. In the cockpit, Arra felt a surge of relief and gratitude so powerful that it brought tears to her eyes. They had done it, had achieved the impossible once again. And though the road ahead was still fraught with peril, she knew that they would face it together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie that had seen them through the darkest of times. Behind them, the free miners fought on, their ships blazing with the fire of 1,000 suns, as they hurled themselves against the might of the Malaxian war machine. They were a ragged band of rebels and outlaws, but in that moment they were the heroes of Agrana Septum, the saviors who had given everything to buy the Dawnbreaker the chance it needed to escape. And as the battered ship streaked towards the safety of open space, Arra knew that she would never forget the sacrifice of the free miners, the brave souls who had given their lives so that others might live. They were the unsung heroes of the resistance, the forgotten few who fought and died in the shadows so that the light of freedom might one day shine again. And though the pursuit was over, the fight for Agrana's septum had only just begun. But Arra and her team were ready, their spirits forged in the crucible of adversity in their hearts, alight with the fire of righteous determination. They were Orion's finest, the unbreakable few. And they would not rest until their mission was complete, until the people of Agrana's septum were free once more. The pursuit was over. The real fight was about to begin. The Dawnbreaker shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the battered ship limping towards the rendezvous point with the last of its reserves. They had escaped the Malaxian pursuit, but the cost had been high. The ship was barely holding together, its systems strained to the very point of collapse. But even as they struggled to keep the ship aloft, Arra knew that their fight was far from over. The Malaxians would not let their escape go unanswered, would not rest until they had hunted down the Dawnbreaker and its crew, and made an example of them for all the galaxy to see. They needed a plan, a way to strike back against the enemy and buy themselves the time they needed to regroup and recover. And as they gathered in the ship's battered command center, Arra knew what they had to do. "We have to take out the Malaxian command ship," she said, her voice ringing with a grim determination. "Cut off the head of the snake, and the rest of the fleet will fall into chaos." The others looked at her in surprise, their faces a mix of shock and admiration. It was a daring plan, a suicide mission that would pit them against the very heart of the Malaxian war machine. But as they looked around at each other, at the battered but unbroken faces of their comrades, they knew that it was the only way. Marcus rumbled, his grizzled face set in a mask of determination. "Let's show these bastards what happens when you mess with Orion's finest." One by one, the others nodded their assent, their eyes alight with the same fierce resolve that burned in Arra's heart. They were the unbreakable few, bound by ties of blood and honor that no force in the galaxy could break. And they would fight to their last breath to see their mission through. The plan was set in motion with a flurry of activity, each member of the team falling into their assigned roles with the practiced ease of seasoned warriors. Zara worked to coax every last ounce of power from the Dawnbreaker's strained systems, her fingers flying across the control panels with a deft, frenetic energy. Jax and Kel readied the weapons, their faces grim as they prepared for the battle to come. In Arra pored over the schematics of the Malaxian command ship, her mind racing as she plotted their course through the enemy's defenses. It would be a gauntlet of fire and fury, a desperate race against time in the relentless might of the Malaxian fleet. But they would not falter, would not yield in the face of the impossible odds arrayed against them. For they had already achieved the impossible, had struck a blow against the very heart of the enemy's power, and rescued their captured comrades from the jaws of hell. And as the Dawnbreaker streaked towards the looming bulk of the Malaxian command ship, its engines straining with the effort of the breakneck pace, Arra felt a sense of calm settle over her. This was their moment, their chance to strike a decisive blow against the forces of tyranny and oppression that sought to crush them underfoot. The enemy fleet closed in around them, a swarm of ships and fighters that seemed to stretch to the very horizon. But the Dawnbreaker would not be denied, would not falter in the face of the overwhelming odds. With a roar of engines and a blaze of weapons fire, the battered ship tore through the heart of the enemy formation, its hull scraping against the jagged edges of Malaxian ships as it fought its way clear. Alarms blared and systems screamed in protest, but still the Dawnbreaker pushed on, determined to reach its target. And then, with a final desperate lurch, they were through. The Malaxian command ship loomed before them, a vast, hulking behemoth bristling with weapons and alive with the fire of 1,000 suns. But Arra and her team were ready, their spirits forged in the crucible of adversity, and their hearts alight with the fire of righteous fury. With a fierce battle cry, they hurled themselves at the enemy ship, weapons blazing and engines roaring as they gave everything they had to bring the beast down. It was a battle unlike any they had ever faced, a desperate, all-out assault against a foe that outgunned and outmatched them in every way. But the crew of the Dawnbreaker would not be denied, would not falter in the face of the impossible odds. With a final shattering roar, the Malaxian command ship exploded in a blaze of fire and debris, the mighty behemoth torn apart by the relentless onslaught of the Dawnbreaker's weapons. The enemy fleet, suddenly leaderless and thrown into chaos, began to scatter and retreat, their formation breaking apart as they fled before the wrath of Orion's finest. And as the Dawnbreaker emerged from the maelstrom of battle, but unbroken, Arra felt a surge of triumph and relief wash over her. They had done it, had achieved the impossible once again. The Malaxian fleet was in ruins, their command structure shattered beyond repair. But even as they savored their hard-won victory, Arra knew that their fight was far from over. The Malaxians were a tenacious foe, and they would not rest until they had hunted down the Dawnbreaker and its crew, and made them pay for their defiance. But for now, in this moment of triumph and camaraderie, none of that mattered. They were the unbreakable few, the last line of defense against the encroaching darkness. And they had shown the galaxy what true courage and determination could achieve in the face of impossible odds. The final stand had been made. Their battle for Agrana's septum had been won. But the war for the galaxy's freedom had only just begun. As the adrenaline of the final battle faded, the crew of the Dawnbreaker found themselves confronted with the harsh reality of their losses. The ship was a battered shell of its former self, its hull scorched and scarred by the relentless onslaught of enemy fire. And the cost in lives had been high, with several of their comrades fallen in the desperate struggle against the Malaxian fleet. Arra moved through the ship's corridors like a ghost, her heart heavy with the weight of the sacrifices that had been made. She had led her team into the jaws of hell, had asked them to give everything they had in the name of their mission. And now, as she looked upon the aftermath of that terrible battle, she couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt and sorrow wash over her. In the medical bay, Ayla worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded, her face a mask of grim determination as she fought to save the lives of her battered comrades. Jax and TV lay on adjacent beds, their bodies broken and bruised but their spirits unbroken. They had given everything they had in the battle against the Malaxians, had fought with a courage and tenacity that defied belief. And then there were the fallen, the brave souls who had made the ultimate sacrifice in the name of their cause. Rafe, the infiltration specialist who had been with Arra since the beginning, had fallen in the final assault on the Malaxian command ship, his body consumed by the fiery explosion that had torn the mighty behemoth apart. Kell, the unflappable sniper who had saved their lives countless times with his uncanny accuracy and unwavering resolve, had been cut down by a hail of enemy fire as he fought to cover their retreat. Their losses were a bitter blow, a reminder of the terrible cost of their victory. But even as she mourned their passing, Arra knew that their sacrifices had not been in vain. They had given their lives so that others might live, had laid down their own futures so that the people of Agrana's septum might have a chance at freedom. As she made her way to the ship's command center, Arra found Marcus waiting for her, his grizzled face etched with the same sorrow and grief that she felt in her own heart. The old soldier had seen more than his share of loss and sacrifice in his long years of service, but the pain of losing their comrades still cut deep. "I'm sorry, Arra," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know how much they meant to you, to all of us." Arra nodded, her throat tight with grief. "They were more than just soldiers," she said softly. "They were family." Marcus placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his eyes shining with a fierce, unwavering pride. "And they died as they lived," he said firmly. "As heroes fighting for something greater than themselves." Arra felt a surge of gratitude and affection for the old soldier, for the unwavering support and loyalty he had shown her throughout their long and arduous mission. He had been a rock in the storm, a steadfast presence that had kept him grounded and focused even in the darkest of times. And as she looked around at the battered but unbroken faces of her remaining crew, Arra knew that their bond was stronger than ever. They had been forged in the crucible of battle, had been tested and tempered by the fires of adversity. And though they had lost some of their own along the way, they had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. They were the unbreakable few, the last line of defense against the darkness that threatened to engulf the galaxy. And though the road ahead was long and fraught with peril, Arra knew that they would face it together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie and sacrifice. For they were more than just soldiers, more than just a crew. They were a family, forged in the fires of war, and tempered by the unbreakable bonds of love and loyalty. And as long as they had each other, as long as they held fast to the memory of those they had lost, Arra knew that there was no force in the galaxy that could stand against them. The losses had been great, the sacrifices beyond measure. But in the end, it was those very sacrifices that had given them the strength to carry on, to fight another day in the name of those who had fallen. And as the Dawnbreaker limped its way back towards the safety of Orion space, Arra knew that their mission was far from over. But with the memory of their fallen comrades to guide them, and the unbreakable bonds of their fellowship to sustain them, she knew that they would never stop fighting for the cause of freedom and justice in the galaxy. The journey back to Centrium was a somber affair, the weight of their losses hanging heavy over the battered crew of the Dawnbreaker. The once vibrant corridors of the ship were now eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional murmur of conversation. Arra moved through the ship like a ghost, her heart heavy with grief and exhaustion. She had pushed herself to the very limits of her endurance, had given everything she had to see their mission through to its bitter end. And now, as the adrenaline faded and the reality of their situation sank in, she felt a bone-deep weariness settle over her, like a shroud. But even in the midst of her sorrow and fatigue, Arra knew that she could not afford to rest, not yet. The Dawnbreaker was a battered shell of its former self, its systems strained to the breaking point by the relentless battles and narrow escapes of their harrowing journey. And with Zara working around the clock to keep the ship together, Arra knew that she had to be there to support her friend and crewmate in any way she could. As she made her way to the engine room, Arra found Zara hunched over a console, her face drawn and pale with exhaustion. The young tech specialist had been working tirelessly to keep the Dawnbreaker's systems running, had pushed herself to the very brink of collapse in her determination to see them through to safety. Zara, Arra said softly, placing a gentle hand on her friend's shoulder. "You need to rest. You've been at this for days." Zara shook her head, her eyes never leaving the flickering readouts on the screen before her. "I can't, Arra," she said, her voice tight with strain. "The power couplings are on the verge of overloading, and if I don't keep rerouting the energy flow, we could lose life support." Arra felt a surge of pride and admiration for her friend's dedication, even as her heart ached at the toll it was taking on her. Zara had always been the heart of the Dawnbreaker, the brilliant mind that kept their ship and their mission running smoothly. And now, in their darkest hour, she was pushing herself beyond all limits to keep them alive. "Let me help," Arra said, moving to stand beside her friend at the console. "Tell me what to do." For the next few hours, they worked side by side, their fingers flying across the controls as they fought to keep the Dawnbreaker's system stable. It was a grueling task, a battle against time and the unforgiving realities of space travel. But with each passing moment, Arra felt a sense of purpose and camaraderie wash over her, a reminder of the unbreakable bonds that held their crew together. And as the long hours of their journey stretched on, Arra found herself thinking back on all they had endured, all they had sacrificed in the name of their mission. She thought of Rafe and Kell, the brave souls who had given their lives so that others might live. She thought of Jax and TV, the wounded warriors who had fought with a courage and tenacity that defied belief. And she thought of Marcus, the grizzled old soldier who had been her rock and her mentor throughout their long and arduous journey. He had seen more than his share of loss and sacrifice in his long years of service, but through it all, he had remained a steadfast presence, a reminder of the unbreakable spirit that drove them all. As the Dawnbreaker finally emerged from hyperspace, the glittering spires of Centrium rising up to greet them like a beacon of hope, Arra felt a sense of relief and gratitude wash over her. They had made it, had survived the impossible odds and the terrible sacrifices of their mission. But even as she stepped out onto the landing platform, her eyes stinging with the brightness of the artificial sunlight, Arra knew that their journey was far from over. The losses they had suffered, the scars they bore both physical and emotional, would stay with them forever, a reminder of the terrible cost of their victory. But they would carry on, would continue to fight for the cause of justice and freedom in the galaxy. For they were the unbreakable few, the last line of defense against the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. And as long as they had each other, as long as they held fast to the memory of those they had lost, Arra knew that there was no force in the universe that could stand against them. The journey home had been a long and painful one, a crucible of sorrow and sacrifice. But it had also been a testament to the unbreakable bonds of their fellowship, to the strength and resilience of the human spirit in the face of impossible odds. And as Arra looked out over the glittering cityscape of Centrium, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, united by the unbreakable ties of camaraderie and sacrifice. As the battered Dawnbreaker touched down on the landing platform of Centrium's sprawling spaceport, Arra felt a rush of emotions wash over her. Relief at having finally made it back to the safety of Orion's capital. Grief for the friends and comrades they had lost along the way. And a sense of trepidation, knowing that their arrival would be met with a maelstrom of questions, debriefings, and the inevitable politics of a mission gone awry. But as the ship's ramp lowered and the crew stepped out into the bright artificial sunlight, they were met with a sight that none of them could have anticipated. A sea of faces stretched out before them. A crowd of Orion citizens and military personnel alike, their expressions a mix of awe, gratitude, and unbridled joy. For a moment Arra was stunned, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the reception that awaited them. But as the cheers and applause washed over her like a wave, she felt a sense of pride and humility well up within her, a realization of the impact their actions had had on the people of Orion. They were heroes, the crowd seemed to say. The brave few who had ventured into the heart of enemy territory, who had struck a blow against the Malaxian war machine and brought their captured comrades home. The ones who had sacrificed so much, who had laid down their lives and their futures for the cause of freedom and justice in the galaxy. As Arra made her way through the throng of well-wishers and admirers, she felt a hand clasp her shoulder, firm and reassuring. She turned to see Marcus standing beside her, his grizzled face split in a rare smile. "You did good, kid," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your old man would be proud." Arra felt a lump form in her throat at the mention of her father, the legendary Orion commander who had inspired her to follow in his footsteps. He had been a hero to their people, a shining example of the courage and sacrifice that defined the Orion way of life. And now, as she looked out over the sea of faces before her, Arra realized that she and her crew had taken up that mantle, had become the new heroes of their generation. It was a heavy burden to bear, a responsibility that weighed upon her shoulders like a physical weight. But as she looked around at her fellow survivors, at Zara and Marcus, at Jax and Teve and all the others who had fought and bled and sacrificed alongside her, Arra knew that she would not have to bear that burden alone. They were a team, a family forged in the crucible of war and tempered by the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie. And together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, would continue to fight for the cause of justice and freedom in the galaxy. As the celebrations continued around them, Arra found herself pulled into a whirlwind of ceremonies and speeches, of medals and accolades bestowed upon her and her crew. It was a surreal experience, a blur of pomp and circumstance that left her feeling drained and overwhelmed. But through it all, she held fast to the memory of those they had lost, to the sacrifices that had brought them to this moment. Rafe and Kell, the fallen heroes whose courage and selflessness had saved countless lives. The brave resistance fighters of Agrana Septum, who had laid down their lives to buy the Dawnbreaker the time it needed to escape. And in the quiet moments between the celebrations and the debriefings, Arra found herself thinking of the future, of the challenges that lay ahead. The Malaxians were still out there, still a threat to the peace and stability of the galaxy. And the Orion Alliance, for all its strength and unity, was not invulnerable to the forces of greed and ambition that lurked in the shadows. But as she looked out over the glittering cityscape of Centrium, At the throngs of people who had come to welcome them home as heroes, Arra felt a sense of hope and determination well up within her. They had faced impossible odds before, had overcome challenges that would have broken lesser crews. And with the strength of their bond, with the unbreakable ties of fellowship that held them together, Arra knew that they would continue to fight, to strive for a better future for all the peoples of the galaxy. For they were the unbreakable few, the heroes of Orion, and their story was far from over. In the days following their triumphant return to Centrium, Arra found herself caught in a whirlwind of activity. Debriefings, strategy meetings, and endless discussions about the future of the Orion Alliance and its place in the galaxy. It was a dizzying experience, a stark contrast to the adrenaline-fueled chaos of their mission on Agrana's septum. But amidst the bustle and the noise, Arra found herself drawn to the quiet solitude of her quarters, a place where she could reflect on all that had happened and all that was yet to come. As she sat at her desk, the soft glow of the city lights filtering through her window, Arra's thoughts turned to the friends and comrades they had lost. Rafe and Kell, the brave souls who had given their lives so that others might live. The resistance fighters of Agrana's septum, who had laid down their futures for the chance at a better tomorrow. Their sacrifices weighed heavily upon her, a burden of grief and responsibility that she knew she would carry with her for the rest of her days. But even as she mourned their loss, Arra knew that their deaths had not been in vain. They had died fighting for something greater than themselves, for a cause that was worth the ultimate price. And as she reflected on the battles they had fought and the challenges they had overcome, Arra couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. They had struck a blow against the Malaxian war machine, had shown the galaxy that even the mightiest of empires could be brought to its knees by the courage and determination of a few brave souls. But even as she savored the sweet taste of victory, Arra knew that their fight was far from over. The Malaxians were still out there, still a threat to the peace and stability of the galaxy. And the Orion Alliance, for all its strength and unity, was not invulnerable to the forces of darkness that lurked in the shadows. There would be more battles to come, more sacrifices to be made in the name of freedom and justice. And as Arra looked out over the glittering cityscape of Centrium, she couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation at the challenges that lay ahead. But even as the weight of her responsibilities pressed down upon her, Arra knew that she would not have to face them alone. She had her crew, her family forged in the fires of war and tempered by the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie. And with their strength and their courage at her side, Arra knew that there was no obstacle they could not overcome, no enemy they could not defeat. As the night wore on and the city lights began to fade, Arra's thoughts turned to the future, to the path that lay ahead. She knew that there would be difficult choices to make, hard truths to confront about the nature of war and the price of peace. But even as she grappled with the weight of her responsibilities, Arra felt a sense of clarity and purpose settle over her. She had been forged in the crucible of conflict, had been tested and tempered by the fires of adversity. And now, as she looked out over the sleeping city and the stars beyond, Arra knew that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She would continue to fight for the cause of justice and freedom, would continue to strive for a better future for all the peoples of the galaxy. For that was the way of the Orion Alliance, the way of the heroes who had come before her, and the heroes who would follow in her footsteps. And as long as there were those who were willing to stand up against the darkness, to fight for the light even in the face of impossible odds, Arra knew that there was still hope for a brighter tomorrow. The road ahead would be long and fraught with peril, but Arra was ready to face it head-on. The aftermath of their daring mission to Agrana's septum had brought a brief respite for Arra and her crew, a chance to catch their breath and lick their wounds in the relative safety of Centrium. But even as they savored the sweet taste of victory and mourned the bitter losses they had endured, the realities of their position soon came crashing back down upon them. As elite operatives of the Orion Alliance, their skills and their courage were in high demand, sought after by military commanders and political leaders alike. And with the Malaxian threat still looming on the horizon, the calls for their services grew louder and more insistent with each passing day. Arra found herself inundated with mission requests and intelligence briefings, each one painting a grim picture of the challenges that lay ahead. The Malaxians were on the move, their armies massing on the borders of Allied space, and their fleets prowling the hyperlanes like hungry predators. There were whispers of a new weapon, a doomsday device that could tip the balance of power in the galaxy and bring the Orion Alliance to its knees. And there were rumors of a traitor in their midst, a high-ranking official who had been seduced by the promises of power and riches offered by the Malaxian overlords. As Arra pored over the reports and the intelligence feeds, she felt a sense of dread and uncertainty wash over her. The challenges they faced were daunting, the stakes higher than ever before. And with each new mission that crossed her desk, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her responsibilities pressing down upon her like a physical burden. But even as the stress and the pressure mounted, Arra knew that she could not falter, could not let the doubts and the fears that gnawed at her take hold. She was a leader now, a symbol of hope and courage for the people of the Orion Alliance. And she had a duty to her crew, to her comrades in arms, to stand tall in the face of adversity and lead them through the battles to come. As she gathered her team for a mission briefing, Arra could see the same determination and resolve etched on their faces. They had been through hell together, had faced down impossible odds and emerged victorious. And they were ready to do it again, to lay down their lives and their futures for the cause of freedom and justice in the galaxy. Marcus, the grizzled veteran who had become her rock and her mentor, stood tall and proud at her side, his eyes glinting with the fire of a warrior's spirit. Zora, the brilliant technician who had kept their ship and their mission alive through the darkest of times, nodded her readiness, her fingers already dancing across the keys of her datapad as she prepared for the challenges ahead. And the others, Jax and TV, the wounded warriors who had fought with a courage and tenacity that defied belief. Nara and Jack, the former captives who had become valued members of their crew, they all stood ready and willing, their spirits unbroken by the trials they had endured. Together, they were the unbreakable few, the heroes of the Orion Alliance and the guardians of the light. And as Arra looked out at their faces, she felt a sense of pride and purpose swell within her, a renewed conviction in the righteousness of their cause. The road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, the challenges they faced more daunting than ever before. But with the strength of their bond and the fire of their determination, Arra knew that they would not falter, would not fail in their duty to the people of the galaxy. For they were the best of the best, the elite operatives of the Orion Alliance, and they would continue to fight, to strive for a better tomorrow, no matter the cost. As the briefing came to a close and the team began to disperse to their duties, Arra felt a sense of calm and focus settle over her. The doubts and the fears that had plagued her were gone, replaced by a steely resolve and an unshakable faith in the strength of her crew. They had a mission to complete, a galaxy to save, and they would not rest until the job was done, until the forces of darkness were driven back and the light of freedom shone once more across the stars. The new challenges that lay ahead were daunting, but Arra was ready to face them head-on. For she was a leader now, a hero of the Orion Alliance. As the Dawnbreaker hung in the void of space, its crew preparing for the next phase of their ongoing mission, Marcus found himself alone in the ship's dimly lit mess hall. The grizzled veteran sat hunched over a table, a half-empty bottle of Orion whiskey, and a battered tin cup his only companions. He had always been a solitary figure, a man more comfortable with the cold steel of a blaster in his hand than the warm embrace of camaraderie. But the events of the past few months had changed him, had forged bonds of friendship and loyalty that he had never thought possible. As he took another swig of the fiery liquid, Marcus's thoughts turned to Arra, the young lieutenant who had become like a daughter to him. He had watched her grow and mature over the course of their mission, had seen her transform from a raw recruit into a true leader, a hero worthy of the Orion name. And now, as he contemplated the future and the challenges that lay ahead, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and protectiveness well up within him. Arra was special, a once-in-a-generation talent with the potential to change the galaxy for the better. And he would be damned if he let anything happen to her, if he let the darkness that lurked in the shadows snuff out the light of her spirit. But even as he savored the warmth of the whiskey and the glow of his paternal affection, Marcus knew that he had a decision to make. The life of a soldier was all he had ever known, the heat of battle and the rush of adrenaline, the only things that made him feel truly alive. And yet, as he looked back on the long years of his service, on the scars and the wounds that crisscrossed his body and his soul, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of weariness, a longing for something more than the endless cycle of violence and death. He had given his life to the Orion Alliance, had fought and bled and sacrificed for the cause of freedom and justice in the galaxy. And now, as he entered the twilight of his career, he couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it, if the price he had paid had been too high. But then he thought of Arra and the others, of the brave men and women who had become his family in the fires of war, and he knew that he could never turn his back on them, could never abandon them to face the darkness alone. With a grunt of effort, Marcus pushed himself to his feet, the bottle of whiskey forgotten on the table. He had made his decision, had chosen the path that lay before him. He would stay with Arra, and the crew of the Dawnbreaker would fight at their side until the bitter end. For they were more than just his comrades in arms, more than just his friends. They were his purpose, his reason for living. And he would not rest until the galaxy was safe, until the forces of darkness were driven back, and the light of freedom shone once more across the stars. As he made his way through the ship's corridors, Marcus felt a sense of renewed energy and determination fill his aged frame. The road ahead would be long and fraught with peril, but he was ready to face it head-on. For he was a warrior of Orion, and his story was far from over. As he entered the ship's command center, Arra looked up from the holographic display, her eyes widening in surprise at the sight of the grizzled veteran. "Marcus," she said, a note of concern in her voice. "Is everything all right?" But Marcus just smiled, a rare glint of humor in his eyes. "Never better, kid," he said, clapping a hand on her shoulder. "Just figured it was time for this old soldier to get back in the fight." And as he took his place at her side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, Marcus knew that he had made the right choice. For he was where he belonged, at the side of the heroes who would change the galaxy forever. And together they would fight on, until the last breath and the last bullet. For that was the way of the warrior, the way of the Orion Alliance. And it was a way that Marcus would follow, until the end of his days. The Dawnbreaker hung in the void, its battered hull illuminated by the soft glow of distant stars. On the bridge, Arra stood before the holographic display, her eyes fixed on the swirling galaxies and nebulae that stretched out before her. She had come so far, had faced challenges and triumphs beyond anything she could have imagined when she first set out on this journey. And yet, as she looked out at the vast expanse of the universe, she couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation, a thrill of excitement at the adventures that lay ahead. Behind her, the crew of the Dawnbreaker stood at their stations, their faces etched with the same determination and resolve that had carried them through the darkest of times. Marcus, the grizzled veteran who had become her rock and her mentor. Zara, the brilliant technician who had kept their ship and their mission alive. Jax and TV, Nara and Jack, the warriors and the survivors who had become her family in the fires of war. Together they had accomplished the impossible, had struck a blow against the forces of darkness, and brought hope to a galaxy on the brink of despair. But their work was far from over, and the challenges that lay ahead would test them like never before. There were rumors of a new threat rising in the outer reaches of the galaxy, a force of such power and malevolence that even the mighty Orion Alliance trembled at its name. There were whispers of ancient artifacts and forgotten technologies, of secrets buried deep in the ruins of long-dead civilizations that could hold the key to victory or destruction. And there were the Malaxians, the implacable foe that had haunted their every step, the enemy that would stop at nothing to see the Orion Alliance crushed beneath their iron heel. They were still out there, still plotting and scheming, still hungry for the power and the glory that they believed was their birthright. But Arra and her crew would not falter, would not back down in the face of the coming storm. They had been forged in the crucible of war, had been tempered by the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie and sacrifice. And they would fight on, no matter the cost, no matter the odds. As she turned to face her crew, Arra felt a sense of pride and purpose swell within her. They were the best of the best, the heroes of the Orion Alliance. and they would not rest until the galaxy was safe, until the light of freedom shone once more across the stars. "All right, people," she said, her voice ringing with the authority of command. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us. But I know that together we can face anything that comes our way. We're the Dawnbreaker crew, the unbreakable few, and we will not fail." A chorus of cheers and shouts of agreement filled the bridge as the crew rallied around their leader, their captain, their friend. And as the stars stretched out before them, beckoning them onward to new adventures and new challenges, they knew that they were ready for whatever lay ahead. As the Dawnbreaker leaped forward, its engines roaring with the promise of new horizons and untold wonders, Arra felt a smile tug at the corners of her lips. The road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but she was ready to face it head-on. For she was a leader now, a hero of the Orion Alliance, and her story was just beginning. With Arra at the helm and her crew at her side, the stage was set for a new chapter in the saga of the Dawnbreaker. The galaxy was vast and full of mysteries, and there were sure to be untold adventures waiting for them in the depths of space. Perhaps they would uncover the secrets of an ancient alien civilization, long thought lost to the mists of time. Or maybe they would find themselves embroiled in a bitter war between rival factions, each vying for control of a vital resource or strategic location. There might be daring heists to pull off, with the crew using their unique skills to infiltrate heavily guarded installations and make off with valuable intel or powerful artifacts. Or there could be tense negotiations with hostile alien races, as Arra and her team fought to forge alliances and keep the peace in a galaxy on the brink of chaos. But no matter what challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain: the crew of the Dawnbreaker would face them together, bound by the unbreakable bonds of friendship and loyalty that had seen them through so much already. They were more than just a team, more than just a crew. They were a family, forged in the heat of battle and tempered by the sacrifices they had made. And as long as they had each other, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. So as the Dawnbreaker charted a course for the unknown, its crew stood ready to face whatever the universe had in store. And their story was far from over. I hope you enjoyed this story. As you can tell, the author has a lot more that they want to write in this universe, so leave a like and a comment if you'd like to see it.